I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is a special meeting of the Kirkwood Meadows Public Utility District for Saturday, October 12th, 2013. The time is 8 a.m., just about. Marina, do you have any announcements?
I do. Welcome to the board meeting on October 12th. Today, this meeting is being fed live over the internet, and the public can view this meeting by going to our website at www.kmpud.com and follow the appropriate link. If the public would like to make a comment, they may send an email to kmpud@volcano.net. Also, if you'd like to make a comment during any part of this meeting, please stand up and address the board. And today we welcome Michelle Gamble and Matt Wheeler.
Welcome. Peter, roll call.
O'Grady? Here. Andy? Here. Rickard?
Here.
Norberg here. And Epstein. Epstein here. All present in the mechanic work.
Thanks, Peter. Okay.
Welcome to the conference call. Please input your access code followed by the pound key. At the tone, please record your name for announcement to the call organizer, and then press the pound key to enter your conference. You will now enter the conference. The subscriber has not yet arrived at the conference call. If you are the subscriber, please press the star key now. Please enter your subscriber PIN followed by the pound sign.
Good morning, this is Howard.
Hi, Howard.
Hi, Howard.
Okay. Steve Gregory.
Has arrived.
Hi, Dave.
Good morning.
Morning. Okay, we are now on item 4, oral communications. This is an opportunity for anyone in the public to address the board on any matter not on the agenda. Seeing none, we move to the agenda and consent calendar. Are there any corrections or changes to the agenda or consent calendar? If not, I'd like to entertain a motion to adopt the consent calendar.
So moved. I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Consent calendar is adopted.
Drew, are you aware there's a little bit of feedback that's happening?
No, I was not.
Okay.
Have my voice?
Yeah.
My mic. Okay, we move, is that okay?
Yeah, sounds good back here.
Okay, we now move to new and unfinished business. Item 8A is discussion and possible action regarding the design, timeline, bidding process, costs, construction activities, and impacts of the U.S. government shutdown. That's a new phrase in this agenda item, associated with the Out Valley Power Line project. Welcome, Michelle.
We're going to handle this in 3 phases. First, Michelle's going to give an update. Howard's going to do a presentation, and then I'll have some closing remarks.
Well, good morning.
Michelle, can you just do Mary Had a Little Lamb or something? I want to see how these little satellite mics are working.
Can you hear me now? How's that?
Yeah.
Mary Had a Little Lamb.
Hey, Mary Had a Little Lamb. So Howard and Dave, can you hear her okay?
Yeah, I'm hearing Michelle.
Okay.
Oh, excellent. Great. Excellent.
Okay.
They're a success.
She doesn't have a satellite.
No, but it's right there by Bob Epstein, right?
These are integrated.
These are either on or muted with this button here, right? Green and red. Green.
Right, they'd be on with the green.
Okay, Michelle, thank you.
All right. Well, I'm excited to be here before the board today in October. I can't believe it's October already. The Out Valley project has been making what I think is exceptional progress this construction season. We're hoping to have a couple more weeks of construction to wrap up a couple things and make a little bit more progress on a couple other items. So first of all, I'll start with the underground project. As of last Friday, Q&D had installed approximately about 36,500 linear feet of conduit and about 39,500 linear feet of direct bury cable. So we've done about 15 and a half miles of the underground project this season. With the direct bury cable, we have all but one section installed. That other section is being delivered on Monday, or the final reel is being delivered on Monday. And so Q&D will complete the installation of the direct bury cable next week. So that's all going to be done this construction season. Last week, they were finishing up a section of conduit in the Caltrans right-of-way in an unpaved area. We're completely done with cutting pavement this year. We got too late in the season to go ahead and try and open up any more pavement sections. They did get everything paved back in the Caltrans right-of-way, and then everything's paved back along Tragedy Springs Road. So we are complete with paving, getting everything restored that was in a paved area. They began reseeding some of the disturbed areas already. They're only focusing on areas where we're not going to need to get in and do work next year for pulling cable or installing sectionalizing cabinets or vaults. So there's a couple areas that are going to be winterized, but they're not going to be reseeded. The large trencher was demobilized from the project area towards the end of September. The last work that they did was trenching along Bear River Road. We had an opportunity to get in and trench from the dam south to the start of the overhead line. We were able to do that without really impacting much of the paved area. So they went ahead, they went in and trenched that area, got that trenching complete. They've backfilled the area. We have not installed conduit there. They're going to come back before the road is open in the spring, and their goal is to get all of that conduit in from the overhead all the way up to 88 on Bear before the road is open in the spring. Q&D's begin installation of the vaults and sectionalizing cabinets. Two of the vaults have been installed, two of the large vaults have been installed. The first one was at the powerhouse, and then the second one was just across 88 at Kirkwood Meadows Drive. We have one more large vault that we're going to install this season, and it may have been installed yesterday, but I didn't get an update yet from the inspectors. And it's right where we come off of El Dorado Irrigation District and Forest Service property back to 88. There's been a big vault sitting on the side of the road.
It was still there yesterday.
Oh, okay, then it hasn't been installed, so it's going to get installed next week then. They've also started installing the ground sleeves for the sectionalizing cabinets so that we can pull the cable here in Kirkwood. So you'll see at various locations here in Kirkwood, you'll see just about 2 inches of a green box sitting up out of the ground. It has a piece of plywood and some rocks on it right now. There's 1, 2, 3 of them. The tops are coming, we believe, next week. They're supposed to be here. We'll be able to get the tops installed, and then the cable for pulling here in Kirkwood is installed is on track for delivery. We're looking at doing that cable pulling October 28th is the date that we have scheduled right now.
The conduit for the creek?
Yes, the creek crossing was completed about 2 weeks ago.
Can't even tell everything.
I know, they did a phenomenal job of crossing through the creek. They've placed additional rock riprap there. They did a really nice job of matching all the rock in that area, so.
That was the biggest concern, that they matched the rock color. That actually came up during the...
So it's nice when you see, the work that Q&D's been doing. They come in and they get out, and, while they've been constructing, for those of you that are going on the tour, we have some photos of some of the construction that we'll provide you. There's a lot of disturbance that's happening, and then to see everything get put back, they're being very conscientious about how they're putting everything back. One of the first areas that has been, it actually got seeded this week and was put back was EID property there just east or west of Silver Lake. And you can tell that it was disturbed. You can tell we constructed there. But it looks pretty doggone good. And the property owner has since come back and put some piles of tree limbing stuff they've done there. But if you didn't see that there, you'd go, wow, this is going to look really nice in about a year. So I'm really pleased with what they're doing. So right now what Q&D is finishing up is they're going to finish up the direct bury segment. They're going to finish up installing vaults for volcano telecommunications in areas we've had to do the relocates. They're going to finish up installing some of the sectionalizing cabinets, and then some of the restoration work that we can do for the project, and then pulling cable in Kirkwood. And so those are the items that we're anticipating getting done this construction season. Any questions on the underground?
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
I can point out pavement patches today, so there's, the tour will be interesting because all the stuff's under the ground, so.
Michael, you're going to do some bollarding. Is that all going to be done on the sectionalizing cabinets that are currently installed or will be installed before this snow season? You're going to have them all bollarded before the snows on the ground?
Yes, sir.
Cool. Would that include stuff like on the other side, Highway 88, or any of the places downstream from there? Or
We won't put bollards on vaults as they're intended to be driven on, but we would put bollards on sectionalizing cabinets.
okay.
And anything that gets installed, if we have a ground sleeve that's installed, the ground sleeves, again, right now only stick up about 2 inches. Those will be protected. Those will have something on the top, something to keep them, they're just metal, so something to keep them from changing their shape. And then we'll have them protected with boulders anywhere we're out on the forest roads. They're going to be covered with snow, but we don't want anything to hit them. If we have a sectionalizing cabinet that the top gets installed anywhere out on the forest, and then those will receive their final bollard treatment and what's the word I'm looking for? The little utility markers that go out there. So they'll have some notification that there's something there. The overhead project, we actually received our U.S. approval for the Wilson contract last week. But in anticipation of receiving that, we issued the notice to proceed back on September 17th. So Wilson began mobilizing that same week, and they've begun clearing and grubbing and the pad construction. They're actually starting the drilling of 01, which is the drilled pier foundation at Salt Springs Monday morning. And then they have their second drill rig is starting with other drilled piers, another one on the 115 line, and then they'll move to the first drilled pier on the 34-5 line on Tuesday. So we had a meeting with them yesterday and went over just their plan for how much they can work for the rest of the year. And it's kind of as weather permits. We talked extensively about what the impact of snow does to their operation. If we have a couple inches, 6-8 inches of snow on the ground, it's not an issue to them. If the ground is frozen, it's not an issue. The challenge that we have is if we get rains and it warms up and we end up having mud in these areas, that's where we end up having some limitations. Or if we end up having so much snow up there that they need to plow the construction access corridor. But right now, based on what we're seeing and what we've talked with Wilson, they anticipate working through November 22nd on the overhead line at this point.
Where does the helicopter come from?
I don't know where it's mobilized from.
Uh-huh.
We have Salt Springs and at Bear River we have helicopter landing pads, and actually PG&E just constructed a new landing pad at Cold Creek that we're getting authorization to use during construction. Wilson's based out of Oregon, but I don't know if their helicopter's there or out of their Sacramento office.
So by November 22nd, assuming weather cooperates and whatever the fire ratings of each day cooperate, and all else goes according to plan, do they think they'll have everything done that we had hoped that they would have done?
Yes, that schedule takes them through getting all of the drilled piers and direct embeds complete and installed. And they actually, on Friday when we spoke with them, they're really, what was I'm trying to think of the word that they used. They're moving forward next week at a very rapid pace. They want to get done before, they want to get all of that work done before that November 22nd. That was their kind of their end date that they were looking at.
And how does nighttime freeze affect that they're going to do concrete work?
Their concrete work is very limited. There's 11 drilled piers that will have concrete. If we end up having freeze thaw, we can blanket that. And the concrete is, again, in the ground, so it is protected to some degree. Anything that is above ground, we can blanket and make sure that it's protected. So that's what's going on with the overhead. The timber harvest was substantially complete on October 2nd. The final walkthrough with the PG&E sub-consultant was completed last week. He had about 6 trees that he wanted to see limbed, and so our timber harvester is going to go back and limb those. They're trees that were actually outside the corridor, but they were large trees that had branches encroaching And so they're going to go back and limb those trees, and that work's going to get done next week.
Was all the were there any new mitigations along that Coal Creek or the Coal Creek tributary where the Foothill Conservancy was concerned?
We implemented the mitigations that we had discussed with Foothill and we had discussed with the Forest Service. We had certain trees that we ended up falling across the creek. There were some additional trees that the Forest Service identified as they were moving through the timber harvest to fall across the creek or to top at a certain height. Those of you that are going on the tour, I'll be able to point out some of those areas that we implemented those mitigation measures, so you'll see exactly what we did. When you look at it and you look at the amount of vegetation that was preserved, I think it looks really good. I think they really did a nice job of going in and treating these areas very specifically.
Have they sold any of the timber yet, or is?
We have sold the timber to the timber harvester.
Right, but and don't we get compensated if there's a profit to some extent?
The way that the timber harvest contract works is we have a contract with the Forest Service to pay the value of the timber.
Okay.
So the Forest Service established a price and the district paid for that timber. And then what the district does is then the district goes and then offers that timber up for sale to a timber harvester. Unfortunately, this year, Sierra Pacific Industries, who I guess is one of the large purchasers of timber, is not buying any timber off of Forest Service lands because there are limitations as far as where they can sell that timber. So the View 88 project, which is another Forest Service project, they had no timber operations operating this year because they had no market for timber. So the market for timber was very, very low this year.
Okay.
And so our contract with the timber harvester took into account, they paid the district for what they perceived as the value of the timber, which was a very low number. And then we had to pay them to do other mitigation and the mastication and some other clearing on the corridor. So that was all wrapped up into the timber harvest contract.
So did we break even, or did we?
No.
Okay.
It was minus 190 or something like that, wasn't it? Or-
It ended up being minus 170. The timber contract was minus 176.
Something like that.
So.
Okay.
The KM Green substation, we anticipate completion of all of that work in the next week. They have one rock left up on one section of the pad that they've just been grinding away. They chose not to blast, and so they've had rock grinders up there for the last 2 weeks, just going back and forth with grinders on these rocks. The pad construction is essentially done except for that one corner. The road is into its final stages. We'll be able to see that today. They have a rock line channel that goes around the pad that they need to bring the rock up and construct that, and then the final revegetation.
Has arrived.
So it's really, it sounds like several items, so there really isn't a whole lot of work that they have left to do on that.
So was anything learned in the construction of that pad that would either make the next round of bidding, for the foundations and the pad itself, the concrete and so on, either easier or more difficult than maybe had been anticipated?
We know what we're going to be encountering. We're going to be getting some additional bores from Geocon. We know when they constructed the pad's constructed partially in cut and partially in fill. And we ended up having a lot more soil than we anticipated, which was a good thing. So we know that we're not sitting on rocks. What we encountered were these boulders that kind of came up in certain areas, and we actually had one right smack dab in the middle of the pad. The contractor was required to over-excavate the pad in any of the cut areas an additional 2 feet so that we had a very competent structural section in the pad. What we're going to learn from Geocon is specifically where those foundations are going to go, exactly what goes beyond what we excavated to the depth we excavated, and then we'll be able to design those foundations specifically for that exact location on the pad. But we got a tremendous amount of information. The conditions out there were much different than what the original geotechnical report indicated, and even what the second geotechnical investigation indicated. And it's through no fault of the technical engineer. It was just, we had more soil conditions over much of the project, and by soil I mean not usable material for structural fill. We ended up having kind of a little borrow site on site to get our structural fill, because when we got structural fill, it was great material. It was just not here where we needed it. It was over here where we could use it. So, and then the boulders, seeing the boulders coming up was really interesting. Everywhere we wanted to put something, just, there wasn't a boulder here, but right here where we wanted to put the road, there was a boulder. So. We currently will have before you the transformers for the KM Green substation. That was an owner-furnished material bid, so we'll have a recommendation letter for you at this meeting. We have additional owner-furnished material that's going to go out to bid, I believe, next Monday for some additional items, and those will be up for approval by the board at the November meeting. And so we're moving forward on getting all of these OFM items out, the long-term items, which are the transformers. We have those in hand. The other items are shorter term. The actual bids for the substation constructions, those will go out in January. And then I have an updated project schedule, Michael. I don't know if the board had a copy. I've left a copy with Michael. Okay. You can see, the only items that I've highlighted at this point are the completion of the construction items this year, wanting to make sure that we have adequate weather and no other issues that come up that allow us to finish what we've got started out there.
Why are certain ones in yellow?
Those are the 3 items. Those are all 3 construction items.
Uh-huh.
And those are the items that if we ended up having a large snowstorm early, would impact our ability to complete them this season. And so we're watching those very closely, and we're watching the weather very closely.
Okay.
Any questions from the audience? Michelle? Comments? Thank you.
Thanks.
Howard, you're up.
Okay, great. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Great. Michael, do you have the PowerPoint up? I'll wait till you have that.
I have it up.
Thanks, Michael. What I've been asked to do is to kind of give you an idea of the potential impact of a delay in submitting the B8 supplemental loan. So that's what I'm going to be covering. A number of items are required in connection with getting that submission of that B8 supplemental loan. The A8 was your original $50 million loan. The B8 would be the supplemental loan to cover the costs over and above what's available currently. One of the things that needs to be done in that regard is to update the financial forecast, which the board would act upon, and its key is to reflect costs in a manner prescribed by RUS accounting requirements. Jill's working on that, and that activity is underway. Secondly, is this electronic submission of a year-to-date operating report with both profit and loss statement as well as balance sheet. Once again, that needs to reflect based on costs using RUS accounting requirements. Third is a board action on both the updated forecast and a request for the B8 loan amount. There are other updates that will be completed when finalizing this forecast for board review, including determinations as to the extent of anticipated load growth, future expense levels, etc. But the key activity that's delaying it right now is just getting these costs in a manner prescribed by RUS accounting requirements. Next slide. As I mentioned, work has been delayed in updating the forecast due to staff availability. I think everyone knows Jill's out right now, and hopefully we'll be back soon and to be able to help on this activity. Until these costs can be accounted for using prescribed RUS accounting classifications, both the forecast update as well as the electronic submission of year-to-date results can't be completed and submitted to RUS. And as I mentioned before, the B8 supplemental loan will cover the additional project cost to complete the Out Valley project over and above that provided in the A8 loan. Next slide. The original plan had been to submit the B8 loan following board actions today. So that's what our plan had originally been. Right now we're looking at a delay of about 1 month, with action hopefully to be taken next month at the board meeting of November 9th. As you know, due to the current partial government shutdown, no activity would be completed by RUS on the B8 supplemental loan, even until such time as the RUS staff return to work. Next slide. The delay in submitting the B8 loan is not expected to complicate availability of loan funds when they're actually required during the last half of 2014. The following activities have to be done in order to get this all done. Number one is to submit the B8 loan after board action on November 8th. Then RUS staff would review and process the loan. And then once again, that's subject to congressional loan appropriation for RUS. And that's a key activity, is that until Congress authorizes a return to government employee and activity as such, as well as appropriation for fiscal year 2014, nothing can be done anyway. And then after loan review and approval, it would be a matter of getting loan documents executed. They first of all issued and then executed. That involves mortgage and a note. And finally, at that point, upon clearance of those documents, we're hoping that loan funds could be available in August through September. And that's about the time frame when we think the supplemental loan funds would be required in any event. Next slide. I've indicated to the Finance Committee that there's a high level of confidence that RUS will consider favorably the B8 supplemental loan. They've already given you approval for the A8 loan. It's key and important for you to complete the project, and RUS understands that. Congress definitely has to appropriate loan funds to RUS, I would indicate that for the last 3 fiscal years, including the one that just ended September 30th, there were more appropriated loan funds available to RUS than there were applicants. So long as Congress continues its pattern of providing adequate loan funds, there should be funds available. And then, as I mentioned, key actions needed with regard to increasing the federal debt limit as well as appropriations for each federal agency, including RUS. Any questions on this part of the presentation?
No.
Okay, moving on. The next area that I was asked to kind of give you an update is, what is the financial impact should the Out Valley project completion be delayed into 2015? I've kind of given you some information earlier about that, but I will update this a little bit today. Using the following assumptions, an analysis was completed to determine the impact of delaying the project from October 2014 into June of 2015. First assumption was that 15% of the overall capital costs would be delayed from 2014 into 2015. We didn't analyze the potential costs for contractor demobilization, remobilization for that additional year. That hasn't been analyzed and has not been reflected in this analysis, since we've not yet determined, or because it's not necessary at this point, we haven't determined what those costs would be. Next slide. In effect, there is no change in operating cost, i.e. a wash in either increase or decrease costs, if you were to continue to have the O&M and using diesel along with all of its costs versus Out Valley O&M costs, including PG&E costs, if there were a delay. So the first aspect that we kind of made an assumption here is there'd be generally a wash in overall operating costs between delaying versus being able to have the project be able to be implemented as of November 2014. Next slide. The key impact of a delay is that you would have additional interest during construction associated with delaying the project from October 2014 until 2015. I initially assumed an interest rate of 3% to do this. And using a 3% interest rate, The increased IDC cost would be $570,322, which would be amortized over the life of the project, meaning that retail rates would recover that additional capital cost, IDC, over the life of the project. I've also calculated this increase in IDC at several different interest rates than 3%. One was I looked at what's your current composite interest rate for all $41.2 million of advances of the $50 million. Right now, you've advanced 82.5% of the overall A8 loan at a composite interest rate of 3.15%. Using a 3.15%, the IDC would increase by $598,500. What does that represent with regard to retail rates in 2015? This not in the slide. I actually prepared this morning right before the meeting, but the $570,000 of IDC would increase retail rates by about 3.35 cents or 5.3% of overall rates. $598,000 using the 3.15 would increase retail rates by about 3.41 cents or 5.433% of overall rates. So bumping it from 3% up to 3.15 represents only about a 0.13% increase in overall rates compared to what it would be at 3%. Next slide. These projections will be subject to revisions as a result of several things. I mentioned earlier, we don't know what costs would be for contractor demobilization, remobilization. They've not been determined or calculated. The actual interest rates, really the only thing that would be not known at this point is what interest rates would be done during 2014. But with 42% of the original $50 million advanced, it would represent a relatively small amount of additional advances. And then what portion of costs would be delayed from 2014 into 2015? And then finally, when would the Out Valley project actually be completed? We've assumed in this analysis it would be June 2015. Any questions?
Any questions from the board?
I have two. The first question is, I'd like your opinion on if we don't finish it by 2014, what part is remaining to be done, and could that work be done in the first 6 months of the following year? That's my first question. Can you use your crystal ball and inform us?
There's a lot of variables in that.
Yeah.
If they were able to get the 34.5 line constructed in 2014,
right.
Then the remainder of the work could be constructed early in 2015. If that were reversed, if the 115 line were completed, but the 34.5 was not, and we had no relief on the Spotted Owl LOP, then we would not be able to get back in and complete construction until August 15th of 2015.
Right.
So.
Okay, that's what I assumed. And then, Howard, the $570,000 increased in interest. What's our annual debt service on that? Isn't it? It's just a little over 3% of that number, right?
Yeah, you would take 3% of that value. That would be the interest component associated with it. Yes.
And then
but you also have depreciation associated with it as well.
Okay,
so you'd have depreciation and you'd have interest. Well, cash basis you would have depreciation. On an accrual basis you have depreciation. On a cash basis you would have the payment of principal.
Okay, but if I just do that mentally in my head, that seems like it's less than $30,000 a year.
But what you would have, though, on that mop is you'd have, on an accrual basis, you would have the depreciation associated with it plus the interest expense. So it's both depreciation as well as the interest impact. So it's both actually.
So it'd be more like $60,000.
Right.
And $68,000 represents 1 penny on our rates.
Yeah.
So it's slightly under a cent per kilowatt hour.
But we included from the presentation, it was cents a kilowatt hour.
That's why I'm trying to clarify this. I think it's 1 cent per kilowatt hour. But I did that completely in my head with no artificial aids.
Yeah, actually, I used my spreadsheet. I can make sure you have it and make sure you can see how I've done it.
But is it 1 cent or 3 cents?
It's 3 cents, $570,000 amortized over the life of the project.
Right.
The 3.35 cents per kilowatt hour of increased rates, which is 5.3% of overall rates in 2015. And it would be interest expense plus the depreciation of that as well.
Right. Okay, well, okay. Standish, you.
I had the same question.
Has left the conference.
Basically took the 570 divided by 35, and that's $16,000 a year.
Right, and then you double that for depreciation, then add some amortization. Well, Howard, I guess, yeah.
We'd love to see the spreadsheet.
I'm not sure that it isn't 1 cent still, but why don't we
Okay,
just not make,
I'll send you
but
that
my first choice is to not have it happen, so.
Sure.
Does the possibility of a delay make it more complicated when we get into this tax question with asset transfer to PG&E?
Most definitely. Depending on what defines the completion of the project, would define what sort of tax we would pay on those expenses.
Potentially a bigger item than the one we just talked about? Just guessing.
Yes. So staff wanted to bring this up. Of course, some of the assumptions can be like the cost of the project, that might go up, the date of the completion could go up, the impact of the ITCC. But Eric and I felt that it was important to bring this up, but we didn't provide any other assumptions or options on this until we could get feedback from the board. If you want to see, different scenarios, we could certainly do them, but I just...
Well, I think that the real point, I personally don't think we need more scenarios. I just want us and our public, customers to be prepared for this possibility, because it really is a possibility right now, depending on the government shutdown and what possible impact it might have on us and weather and so on. So, I hope it doesn't happen, but I think we need to be kind of prepared, and it would be good to understand why it's 3.5 cents rather than 1 cent, or for example.
Okay, I would suggest that we target the December board meeting, because at that point we'll know exactly how much construction we got, we'll have a complete set of facts, and we could do some what if based on the, that demobilization in November.
Right. I think that the where we might have a little bit of control over the increases, that if we know it's the 34K line that's got to be completed in 2015 and it can't be done until August, then maybe we delay some of our investment, some of our 2014 investment, so we're not accruing so much interest. Maybe. I don't know. But we've only got another, I guess still $15 million to borrow, right? Something like that.
Well, I think the other thing is that if we understood the financial implications of a potential delay, it gives us some framework within which to consider countermeasures, things that we might do to accelerate so that we do not fail to get it done, right? If it was $600,000, just taking the number there for talking purposes, a $600,000 impact of a delay, and if we could figure out some way to spend less than $600,000 to ensure that we did get it done during 2014, we might want to understand those options.
Right.
Well, I don't need any more scenarios. I think we should try to get as much accomplished on all the projects as we can between now and, November 31st, and reconsider at the December board meeting. And, Michael and I have talked about it, but, getting some relief on that LOP window would be great. I don't know if that's a pipe dream or a realistic possibility.
We've had discussions, I've had 2 discussions in the last 2 weeks with the Forest Service about that, and what they have told us, what the district ranger has told us, is they will work with us and do whatever they can do on their end. And in talking with the biologist as well, he has made those assurances to us. It may be that they are limited what they can do by federal law, but they understand the implication of that to the project. And again, right now it's a weekly conversation I have with them.
Any questions on this aspect from the audience? Milleen?
If it relates to 2015, what would that translate in terms of cost per kilowatt hour? What are you estimating? Huh?
Well, Howard's spreadsheet is saying 3.5 cents a kilowatt hour.
And so how much is that?
Well, instead of, if I'm remembering the graphs right, in 2015, we were supposed to be at 63 cents a kilowatt hour or something like that. So instead of that, it'd be 66 cents.
50 what?
66 cents.
66 cents.
Rather than 63.
Because I don't remember what we had projected.
Yeah, there's this spike
Mhm.
up in about 2015, and then it starts to, theoretically, hopefully, it will start to decline after that, but it spikes up in 2015.
And one of the reasons for the spike is we have two systems operating. We're not completely on the grid, we have a hybrid, and so that's extra costs, and then that transitions out.
But if we don't have to go to 2015 for completion, then the rate would be...
The 63 or 64, whatever
Yeah.
has been on the graph, plus the overhead costs are higher than we thought they would be, and we're not quite sure of the ITCC impacts yet, and so on. So the exact amount depends on what that amount is.
That's one question, and then I was wondering if Howard had any ideas, as a community, what we as a community can do to tell our story to Congress, that we really need, the government open again. And I don't know if he has any sense, if any way we can be helpful.
Howard, were you able to hear that through our new satellite mics?
I believe I heard was that, what could you tell the community with regard to the government shutdown? Is that what I was hearing?
No, what Milleen was asking was, do you have any suggestions about how we can approach our own Congress people or whomever, Congress in general, to remove the danger that we might face with this ongoing government shutdown? Do you have any suggestions is the question.
Well, anytime that there is ever constituent issues, the key is to call the Congress and their staff and let them know what your concerns are. I mean, I think everyone is frustrated with the fact that the government shut down. It's impacting the overall economy, and I'm hopeful as everyone that this gets resolved quickly. It just doesn't kind of make sense, but every voter has the ability to contact their congressional staff and congressional member representation. So I'd rather not go any further than that.
Does the PUD as an entity have any ability to talk to them?
Well, I think we have.
We're going to have a discussion about the shutdown and its implications, right? We haven't had that yet? Is that on the agenda?
This would be the agenda topic.
Okay, well, so I was in Washington this week asking that question, and I guess the feedback I got is not encouraging, but basically our representative, Tom McClintock, has to feel like it matters to us, and so if we wanted to organize members of the community who vote in the district to call his office, that would have an impact. And we could put together what we'd like them to say, us as a board contacting him, since if we, well, I guess we're all voters, but the impact as being voters is more relevant than being a board.
So how would we go about doing all that?
Well, if we wanted to do that, I could recommend who to call and what to say.
Yeah, I think having a name, rather than, if there's a staff person, for example, to specifically contact, so that...
When you call Congressman, they have a staff person that intercepts these things and sets up a case, right? Isn't that the kind of...
Yeah, they will log the calls and compare it. But you want to get past that and talk to the chief of staff or somebody else.
You can do that? Ms. Asper?
Yeah.
So maybe if we just have the name and number, and then I think people can do what they need to do.
A couple of sample messages
Yeah.
to do it. Because the question is, are they getting calls that this is impacting his district, the economic vitality of his district negatively?
And
What's he
so
trying to
you
do?
want to say in your call that it's impacting the
Yeah,
PUD,
that-
art, I mean,
Well, we don't need to
Okay.
do it right now. I could make
Okay.
some suggestions if people are willing to call.
I think that's a good idea. I do.
In terms of when this is going to be resolved, I mean, I talked to several senators who said, over this weekend, they're negotiating various ways of extending it for a few months to do some time, but they don't, as of Thursday, there wasn't a lot of pressure from the public. It wasn't starting to hurt except for a few isolated incidences.
the shutdown?
They're not getting a lot of phone calls. Yeah.
Well, let's do our part.
Yeah, so I think we can do that, but there's a chance that it might get pushed out a little bit and they'll give you temporary relief.
Okay, so you'll
Sure.
give Michael a couple of messages, and he can, what?
Well, we could do an email to the community.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's going to matter most to people who actually vote, and this might impact how you vote in the future.
Yeah, I don't know. As far as the district putting out a political message, I think this would be more of an individual.
Right.
I don't think I could put this on the website.
Okay. Okay, Bob,
Yeah.
thanks.
But we could email to registered voters.
As concerned citizens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Two additional projects have developed due to the Out Valley project. In a cost-saving move, the district has purchased many items directly as owner-furnished material. One of these items is the underground cable, which was delivered on large wooden spools. These 9-foot-high spools have no deposit and are the district's responsibility to dispose of. So we have 40-plus 9-foot wooden spools sitting in a staging area that has to be cleared by November 1st for the ski area. Outside service costs to demobilize and remove these is over $40,000. Staff will begin on Monday demobilizing these and trucking or putting these in large dumpsters to get rid of these large spools. And during our Out Valley tour, we'll actually show you these humongous wooden spools that are going to be demolished and put into dumpsters and taken away. So I think we saved money on the owner-furnished material and that whole, but this was a little oversight that we didn't anticipate that will keep Rick's staff busy for at least a couple of weeks.
We can't auction them off at the next volunteer fire department day.
Burn pile? Yeah. You can't burn them because they're not natural. So the only thing we can do is haul them away. So you'll see the magnitude of the problem when we go over there. The new sectionalizing cabinets along Highway or Kirkwood Meadows Drive, as Bob alluded to, will need bollards before the winter season, as will the newly cleared old powerhouse site. We have our vaults there, and when we go up to on the tour, we'll drive by and you can look over, and the switchgear is all gone, the day tank is gone. It looks like a big concrete pad now with all of our material off of it. The big transformer, the Frankenstein transformer, it's now been removed over to the propane tank. So thanks to Brandy's crew, they did a good job in getting district property off of that site. Now we need to protect our remaining property, which is in the ground, and that'll be done with bollards around our main vault system, which is in that location, and the new snowmaking vault, which is at the corner of that road. So we'll be putting in a total of 18 bollards this fall as well. The second item, staff has been working with PG&E to determine the ITCC tax we will be subject to, and staff has copied the board on the most recent correspondence. Depending on what Congress does, at this point, it is at 22% ITCC tax for 2013 expenditures and 34% on 2014 expenditures. But there are many questions remaining, including what determines the end of the project and what actually Congress does with regards to bonus depreciation. I'm looking for the board authorization to engage a tax attorney at this time to review PG&E correspondence and give an opinion and direction to the district. And I also would like an opinion on what expenditures should be included in that ITCC tax. Dick Shanahan has given the district a referral for us to pursue, and I'd like to pursue that with board authorization.
Who's the referral?
I don't remember his name.
Is it a Washington attorney or a
It's a
local?
Northern California attorney.
Any comments from the board on that? I think it's.
Mike
I
and
think
I have
it's,
discussed it. I think it's the right way to go.
I think it's absolutely necessary.
How much do you think it'll cost?
I would estimate $40,000. That's just an estimate. I can come back with a proposal if the board would like, or I can come back with at least a retainer agreement to see, so that you can see the hourly rates at the November 9th. But I would like to do that subject to possibly Bob Epstein's review of that retainer and permission, and then I'll bring these items forth at the November 9th meeting.
Yeah, I think that that's a good idea. I mean, I think we should know what it might cost and so on before we say yes for sure. But let's get the process started. Seems to me this is pretty important.
Bob, are you comfortable with
Yeah, absolutely. I want somebody who could return their phone calls with authority.
Yeah. Okay. Is it consensus that we give Michael that go ahead?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
That would be the end of the staff report on item 8A.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the audience? Okay, 8B is discussion and possible approval of procurement agreement for the KM Green substation project, 115 to 35 kV power transformer in relation to the district's Out Valley Power Line project.
The district went out to bid for the 115 34.5 kV transformer on September 19th, 2013. On October 8th, the district held a bid opening and received 6 proposals. Dave Riley with Exponential Engineering is here today to discuss the proposals and offer a recommendation. Dave?
Thank you, Michael, and good morning, everybody.
Morning.
The power transformer at the KM Green substation is going to, as you know, convert the voltage from the 115 coming from PG&E down to our 34.5. It is, because of the voltages on either side, is considered a transmission-type transformer. And I wanted to point that out because RUS, in their requirements for procuring material, has a list of material acceptable to RUS. This type transformer is not on that list, therefore it is not applicable that this transformer be included in an RUS list. Instead, Exponential Engineering wrote a specification for the transformer. And I want to point out that as per the interconnection agreement and the PG&E interconnection handbook, we needed to and we received approval from PG&E for the specifications of the transformer as well. I also want to point out that the transformer as specified meets and even slightly exceeds the capacity of the total 10 megawatts that is part of the interconnection agreement with PG&E for total power capacity. Just a few other things about it. I want to remind the board that this transformer will be owned and maintained by KMPUD. It's not going to be anything that PG&E deals with in the future. This is the largest and most expensive item in the KM Green substation as far as owner furnished material, and it has the longest lead time, which is why we are ordering it first. A few other things about our evaluation. The specifications provided requirements for evaluating the losses associated with the transformers. We did that, and what that evaluation does is looks at the projected long-term power costs to the district, because when a transformer is energized or when a transformer is being used, it uses power. In other words, it has losses. So those evaluations are also included. We've received 6 proposals. As you can see, the transformer proposal proposed by Virginia Transformer Corporation, which had the lowest purchase price, also had the lowest evaluated cost, including looking at long-term losses. We confirmed that Virginia Transformer signed all the proper RUS contract documents and agreed to the supplemental conditions that are part of our purchase documents, and that the contractor has agreed to meet our delivery schedule, and the fact that the transformer will be delivered by the manufacturer to the substation site, that's also part of the documents. So the transformer is FOB job site, and the pricing for that delivery is included in this. The original estimated cost for this transformer, which was looking at a transformer that could meet the capacity requirements of the project, were $480,000. Obviously, we're substantially less than that. I'll be happy to answer any other questions. Otherwise, my recommendation to the KMPUD staff is to award the contract to Virginia Transformer for $233,106.
Bob, abstain.
Can I ask some questions? Is this a standard item, or are they building a custom transformer?
This is, all power transformers like this are essentially customized. However, these manufacturers do have a set of transformer coils and tanks and windings that they use. They apply they basically have some building blocks of cores and tanks.
Okay.
But every transformer like this is custom built.
All right. And this is going to operate inside the building or outside?
Outside, this is an outdoor unit.
Okay.
It has radiators and fans. This transformer is actually oil-filled. It will be sitting on an oil containment system that we're designing into the foundation in case of a leak. And it has bushings, the connections, the actual electrical connections to the transformer come out the top, 115 kV on one side, 34.5 kV on the other side, these large gray
Right.
insulator-looking connections.
And then how does it interact with snow?
The transformer is going to be, the design of our foundation is actually getting it up over what we believe the average snow accumulation is at that site. But transformers generate a fair amount of heat, and snow will be melting around it.
Okay.
All the time that it's energized, it's generating some heat.
Okay. And I guess my other question is, in terms of a 35-year lifetime, what would be the expectancy of failures, and how is it repaired? I realize that's independent of what we bid on, but I just wondering how that works.
From my experience, we see transformers regularly that last. Transformers like this that meet these specifications last up to 50 years if they're not overloaded. And looking at the loads for the system, including Howard's long-term projections that he included in the financial forecast, we will not be exceeding the 10 megawatts. Therefore, it will not be running very hot. There still is a chance for damage to occur in the event that there is a problem inside the tank. Typically, what happens is the transformer has to be rewound. So this is what I've seen happen with very old transformers or transformers that were damaged by overloading. And a rewind is a process in which you actually have to take the transformer out, send it back to a factory. It can take up to 6 months to have it rewound.
So for this kind of equipment, for reliability, what kinds of parts and so on do we need to sort of have on hand or contract with someone to have on hand? I mean, is it expensive?
We are not recommending any spare parts at this time. There are removable components of this transformer. The bushings I just mentioned, lightning arresters, there are other pressure relief valves and other devices. These are commercially available and readily available, including the actual bushings themselves. And in the event of a failure of one of those, it would be simple. It would be fairly easy for the district to acquire one, a replacement part. That's why we're not recommending any spares.
And at this point, we don't know who's going to maintain this, right? I mean, this transformer?
We know we own the responsibility.
We own the responsibility, but we don't know how we're going to do it yet.
No, we've made contacts with people that do this work, but we have not retained anyone.
And my final question is the warranty on this?
5 years.
Yeah, there is a 5-year warranty on the core and coils.
But
It's equivalent to the warranties provided by the other bidders.
But even though it's under warranty, let's say a worst-case failure could be a pretty significant weight for it to be repaired.
Correct.
Although it'd be pretty weird to have a coil fail, right, early.
Or a core.
Yeah, right.
That is true.
Right, because it's just a collection of wire wound around a magnet, right?
Steel core. That's
Steel core,
correct.
yeah. Okay.
From my perspective as an electrical engineer, some of the biggest risks for a transformer is when there's a fault on the line. In other words, let's say there's a fault on the 35 kV system. The power is flowing from PG&E through the transformer to the fault. The way we protect this transformer, as well as the cable itself, is by having very high-speed protection systems and the breakers that isolate to the transformer. And that is completely a part of the KM Green design.
Okay.
In fact, there are CTs, there are current transformers in this particular transformer we're purchasing today that we will be using to sense the power flowing into the transformer that allows us to quickly disconnect it within milliseconds in the event of detecting a problem.
Okay, those are my questions, thanks.
Okay. Any questions from the audience? Jim?
Well, if there is a catastrophic failure with the transformer, is there a provision or is there a source that we can get a mobilized temporary transformer in place while this one gets rebuilt and replaced? Seems like there could be a tremendous delay there if something happened.
Dave, could you hear the question?
I can answer that.
Yeah, please.
You know, some utilities that have many transformers, like a large utility like PG&E, will have mobile transformers, mobile substations that are hauled around on basically semi-truck trailers. It would be unlikely to find one of this voltage on a mobile because it's more of a transmission type transformer rather than the kind that we're going to have, say, at KM Blue, where we drop down to a distribution voltage. There is a market for used transformers. It's possible that the district could find one. In the design of this system, because we know we've got the powerhouse, and the powerhouse is a new installation, we look at that as basically our backup.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, so what we need is a motion to accept this bid. Yes.
It's staff's recommendation to follow the engineer's recommendation and award this bid to Virginia Transformer Corporation.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, do I have a second? Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Well, thank you. It's nice to see a number well below the estimate.
$250,000.
I appreciate your time. I will be dropping off the call now unless Michael has any other use for me.
All sorts of use, but thank you very much, David.
Thank you.
Everybody have a good morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Has left the conference.
Okay.
No, I think Jill's on the line, actually.
Oh.
Jill, you still there? She's probably muted, so she can't talk.
Okay.
I'm still here.
Oh, Jill, well,
Okay.
congratulations and welcome.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we move to item 8C, which is discussion and possible approval of proposal from Computer Courage to complete programming to enable real-time meter reads and alarms, enhanced bill format and presentation, and to create an emergency notification system. And I know the Communications Committee's worked on this, in particular Bob Epstein and Michael.
Yeah, so I'll start off on October 3rd. The district sent a request for proposal to Computer Courage, who's a firm that has helped the district redo its website and to the RFP asked to accomplish three things: to enable the district to receive hourly meter data from electric, propane, and water meters, and to give email and or text alerts of leaks to the district and to the customer, and to enable a secure display of customer statements at KMPUD.com and allow the ability to email these statements, and then to allow for an emergency alert system via email or text. So Bob has been the champion of this. We have received a proposal which is before you, and I have copies for the audience. And Bob, if you wanted to comment.
Sure. So again, the overall goal here is to have within our own website, KMPUD.com, all of the customers' information available in a format that they would enthusiastically utilize. And then we would no longer require any online access at PCS, the current way you would go and see your bill online. So that's the overall area. As we know in the survey that we did with our customers that we reviewed at the last meeting, there were a lot of suggestions that the bill could be displayed in a more meaningful manner with more information. So as a prototype, and borrow this for a second, we've generated, I think I've sent you all copies. You have your old bill, what it currently looks like, and then we've come up with a design for a new bill that fits on one page. It has a lot more information on it. It's easier to read. It has an annual comparison. The sort of things that you would expect on a modern bill presentment. And we've gone through and we've converted every single bill we've issued into this new format. So if you go online in the prototype, you can see every bill from the past. You could actually see charts and stuff like that of your annual usage. So that's our proof of concept that we can take the information we get from PCS, which is a monthly statement generator, convert it into a friendlier format, enhance it with additional data, and display it in, I think it's fair to call it a friendly way.
It's much better.
If not, we'll fix it. So with that in mind, we now want to take this into a production capability. So Computer Courage has done a good job for us in the first two contracts, and we would encourage customers to register at the website. When they do that, if they know the ID of their account, which is the security, they can identify their properties. They match it with their ID that they have to enter in. Then they're registered with that property. They can also register third parties as well. So if you have a renter on your property and you want them to see the information, you can enable them to also be a viewer of that. So taking everything we've done so far as a prototype and then integrating into our current website is one part of this project. There's zero technical risk in doing it. It's mostly just making sure it all works, finding the obscure things like 40 loop. This 40 loop that wasn't in the database because it doesn't have its manually read meter. So we have a bunch of little stuff like that to clean up, but that's one phase. Then the second aspect is Census is our provider of our smart meters. So they can, for a nominal fee, on an hourly basis, set up a program to automatically take all of the meter reads, send them to our database to be integrated, and then customers who have registered could go online and they could, for any of their meters, they could ask for historical data by day, by hour, by month, and that would all be available there, representing what the meter actually says is going on. Once we have that, then we need to develop algorithms to say, is there an unusual meter read? And this would be particularly important if we decide to go ahead with the next item with water meters. We'd get an hourly read on a water, and you'd have to decide what's an unusual amount of water for this location at this time of year. And if it's unusual, that could be an indication of a leak. And then that would trigger a notification to our employees, and if the homeowner wishes, also to the homeowner. It could be that they got a larger hot tub and they're using their irrigation and their other water at the same time, and it's 10,000 gallons, who knows what it is. But the idea is to minimize the number of false positives over time, but to not miss anything. So that's the second phase, or the second portion that would be done in here. That's the one that we still need some more design work on. And then the last part is we currently use a system called One Call, which is a third party for notifications. And since we know their phone numbers and we know everything is going on, we could just re-implement that in the same system. So there'd be in our one website, everything, all the customer interactions could be handled with one password, with just a single account login. And so that's the total package. What I was not able to do with Computer Courage is come up with a spec that's so detailed, like Dave Rightly did with the transformer, that someone could bid it down to the exact number of hours it'll take to program. So what you see in front of it is a not to exceed contract of $15,000. And the way to lower that is to simplify portions of the project or have me do more of the work. And
That's a good way to do it.
yeah, since I'm at a fixed monthly rate, which is fine. I enjoy doing it, so that's not a problem. So that's the direction we'll go in. There could be some net savings by no longer paying for, no longer requiring the online access at PCS. Jill and I need to really think through whether we've covered all of that adequately before we do that, but that's possible. So that's the overall project.
Great. Well, thanks. Any questions from
What
board?
will we save by getting rid of one coal now? Is it significant?
Depending on, because it is a cost, it depends on how much we use it. Rick, do you have any numbers on what a valley-wide notification would cost at this point? It's it's not insignificant.
No, it's an annual cost of approximately $2,000 just to have the system in place, and the pool spreads off that $2,000. So to make a group notification, it's around $400 right now. And we're trying to trim that down by having the customers just give us one number, not multiple numbers for every residence, which really eats it up.
Yeah, and before we could do that cost analysis, we'll use a third-party service that sends SMS messages, but I imagine those are cents, measured in cents, not in these sorts of numbers. So I don't think we're increasing our cost there, but there could be a potential savings. I think the biggest savings will be if we can get everybody off of paper, particularly the resort itself. If we can get everybody electronic, then there's a lot of staff time currently spent printing paper, stuffing envelopes, flipping stamps, whatever. So I do think this will make us more efficient and will raise customer satisfaction and maybe prevent some house damage.
So the detection algorithms you described, you're going to have to tailor those by user, right?
We're going to have to invent them ourselves by looking at data and saying what's an unusual meter read between hours or across several hours, and then we will run those algorithms every hour to say, based on this next read, was there something unusual in the last n hours? So we'll need to figure out what those are and then code the algorithms. The tricky part is figuring out the algorithm. Coding it is not a big deal.
We'd actually, fake a leak like at the powerhouse or someplace and see what those reads are so that we could use that data to create these algorithms.
Yeah, and we can look at, households. We can divide them into different categories and say what's usually going on. Is this unusual? And we might make it overly sensitive to begin with, and then cut back. But probably a large water usage at midnight in a residence. That's probably, not intentional. And I think it'll be trickier with propane to know what that is, if you don't know if the house is occupied or not.
Any other questions? Questions from the audience? Elaine?
Bob, did you get any feedback from Vail about using electronic billing?
Well, Jill and I are planning on putting together an interesting package and saying we will implement this for you if you agree to not require paper anymore. So when I worked at PG&E, what we did for large customers, like the Vail equivalent, we would send them their bill in a spreadsheet. So they could, here's a spreadsheet. It's got all of the data for all of your accounts. Sometimes there'll be 40 or 50 accounts in that. Is that more convenient for you, or would you like a piece of paper where you type it in? And so my thought is we'll find something that works well for them and then barter it and say, well, if you agree, we'll supply this for you if you agree to not accept paper. And they can still get the statements as a PDF file with every statement separated. I just don't want to have to stuff envelopes if we can avoid it.
I think it's a great idea, and come along with it.
Yeah, I don't know, Joe, if you have any comment on that.
she's on mute so that Colleen won't just...
So
Yeah.
the other part of that question is, when we are able to read the meters, is it going to be all the meters at once? I mean, we'll do electric.
Well, we
water,
currently
propane.
can do all electric and propane that have been converted. There are some meters, Brandon, correct me if I'm wrong, that are still manual reads, but those tend to be mostly commercial. Yeah, okay. There's a proposal we'll talk about next to convert the water meters.
Mhm.
If we decide to go forward with that, then the water meters would be available when they're installed. But I think we might be live with electricity and propane before the end of this year. The water ones would wait until sometime during next year when they're installed. But then, yes, you would, when you log in, you could say, do you want to see your water, propane, or electricity, hot water meter, any meter that you currently have a bill for that has a smart meter, you'd be able to see its usage.
I think it's really important because I think there was another big water leak in the subdivision recently too that did a lot of damage in KMA Unit 2. So
Okay.
it's really, I think it's really important to do it.
Okay, any other questions or comments? We need a motion to approve the Computer Courage proposal dated October 10th for the work described in the proposal, at not to exceed $15,000.
Second motion.
Okay, so Andy moves and O'Grady seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Thank you, Bob. It's just tremendous work.
Yeah, it's fun, too.
Really. Okay, we now move to 6D, which is
Welding is a treat for you.
discussion
Programming is a treat.
discussion of possible
Just kidding.
action regarding the installation of FlexNet automated meter read system for the district's water department. Michael.
Thank you. In the spring of 2011, the board authorized the installation of FlexNet meters and registers on the electric and propane services to eliminate the issue of estimated reads. We all remember the word estimated reads. And to eliminate the issue of estimated read and to provide a mechanism for leak detection. The installation was completed and the district has been happy with the read capabilities. But the leak detection is not automatic and requires running a report and then determining inordinate usage. In March of 2013, the district approved the COP, the Certificates of Participation, which has an allocation to install the water meter FlexNet system. This project has been delayed primarily due to problems with the automatic leak notifications and questions that we had on the installations. As discussed in the previous agenda item, Computer Courage and Director Epstein may have found a solution to the automatic leak detection issue, allowing for an email text message to both the district and the customer if usage is detected above a certain parameter. This project would be funded through the COP, as previously mentioned, which would be paid back through a meter charge of $3.30 per meter per month over a 10-year term. This is similar to how we paid for the electric and propane meters, FlexNet system. The COP project funds would be rearranged to fund this project and also to fund the previously approved increase in the wastewater membrane project. The detail of this rearrangement is reflected on page 39 of your packet. Should the board decide to move forward with this project, the meters would not be purchased until the Computer Courage work was complete and tested to ensure success. The main and primary goal of this project is for leak detection. Because right now we have a radio read system that we saved money with the electric and propane FlexNet system because we didn't have to go around and manually read meters. We have a radio read detection system for the water meters, so we don't have that. It takes approximately 3 to 5 hours to read these meters by driving around, but that's once a month. So if you have a leak on the 1st, you leak until the 31st until we find you. Should the board decide to move forward with this project, the meters would not be purchased, as I mentioned. This is understandably a hard decision for the board with all the recent demands on district funds. This is not a have-to project, and the funds allocated could be used for other projects or needs. However, staff feels that this has been an ongoing problem for many years, and the benefits in the early detection of a water leak is well worth the expense. Therefore, staff recommends pursuing the Flex Wet Water Meter project, given the success of the Computer Courage programming project. And the outline of the COP funds, as I mentioned, is on page 39.
I'm trying to understand where the 143 shows up on page 39. Am I just missing that? That's the 149 now? By department water. In other words, I see the water AMI, $107,000.
So there's,
Missing
so
something.
it's a little bit more complicated than that. The water AMI project is made up of three components. One is the material cost, which is $143,000, which there's an invoice in your packet. Then the water and the wastewater departments have to pay for their share of the head-end material. Right now, that has been funded by the propane and electric departments. The reason that the propane AMI is reduced from $110,000 to $78,000 is that they're credited for $32,000 of the expense of the head end, and that expense is now being shown by the water and the wastewater departments.
So where does the 143 show up by project?
It would be divided between the water and wastewater departments as their portions of the material for the project.
I see. Okay.
So the project's total cost is 180, whatever, something like that, and it's divided into two facets. The components of the project's costs are the material costs, the installation costs, and the head-end cost, which has actually already been paid for by propane.
Okay, thanks. Any questions from the board on this? Comments from the public? What I remember is when we first talked about this, or when we talked about it and approved it actually before we went out for the certificates of participation, the public that was here was pretty unanimously in favor of it. So I don't think there's any reason to change our minds. The only thing that I hesitate about is our next item is to raise the water and wastewater rates. And so this is just one more cost on top of those things. So, but I think it's probably something that the public feels would be worth it. Public? That's you and Jeff and Maureen are representing the public.
And Sharon.
Oh,
I think so.
there's Cheryl. I keep thinking of you, Cheryl, as part of our family now.
Well, I know there was a big water leak in Unit 2 this, I don't know,
Unit
last
2 of
month or
what?
so. Of KMA. That did a lot of damage in a house on the meadow in their subdivision. So I haven't talked to the owner personally, but I've heard that it was quite substantial. So, and I just think it's a good idea to be able to.
I had a water leak. Fortunately, it wasn't in the house. Unfortunately, it was on my side of the meter. And it was a bummer. Yeah, no, I know it was a $1,200 bill.
If I might say, I've been working for the district for a long time. If I've had one issue that has been coming up over and over and over is, what do I do about this leak? Why can't I get a leak credit? Where, how come you couldn't detect this earlier? How many times have you been underneath houses turning off water because there's a leak above? It is such a regular issue with the district. If we can solve it, I think we'll all be heroes.
Well, I like the idea of solving the propane one too. It's a real issue too.
I'm in the club, I've had my water leak, my rodent chewed water main.
Yeah.
I want to put a nail in this one.
Okay, then I guess we're looking for a motion to, or is it just, because it's already been approved, right? Or do you want a new motion?
I would like it's been enough time that I would like a reaffirmation of the district's intent.
Okay, so this would be to reaffirm the board's approval of acquiring and installing FlexNet automated meter read system.
Contingent on the Computer Courage thing working.
Yes, sir.
Contingent on Computer Courage system working. So.
Yeah, I think we'll go ahead.
Okay, Peter moves.
I'll second.
Andy seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, we move to a public hearing. Input from the public, discussion and possible approval of ordinance in regards to a rate increase and adjustment for the wastewater, water, and solid waste departments. Michael.
In your packet, you'll find information regarding a potential rate increase for the water, wastewater, and solid waste departments. You will find a notice of public hearing, the 2013 water, wastewater, and solid waste rate study, an ordinance 1303, which if approved adopts this rate increase, the revised regulation 61001, which details the increase, different options for a rate increase reflecting different percentage of increases over different periods, and on page 72, a simple chart showing the potential impacts to a customer's bill if such a rate increase should be approved. The rate study describes the districts in its current rate structure. It identifies the needs for a potential increase in that water and wastewater revenues are not sufficient to meet operating expenses or the additional debt expense of the COP loan. The COP loan was used for many purposes, but mainly for wastewater was to fund the membrane replacement project and the meter project. In water, the COP was used to fund the water study and the meter project. The study recommends the institution of a water meter charge of $1.46 per month per meter to fund the FlexNet meter project. Note that this will appear on the bill as a single water meter charge of $3.30 on the customer's bill. Additionally, the study recommends instituting of a water consumption charge of $4 per 100 cubic foot. An establishment of a meter charge is mandated by the state as a conservation measure. These charges pay for the water portion of the COP debt, pay for the operating expense without depreciation, and begins to fund a reserve for expenses on the as the table on page 54 of your packet demonstrates. For wastewater, the rate study recommends a 3.5% increase each year over the next 3 years on both the base rate and consumption rates. This charge lessens the impact of the department's reliance on the property tax subsidy, as shown on page 55. The rate study further recommends instituting a CPI annual increase for the solid waste department, as is already the case for the balance of the enterprise funds. District staff feels it is important to keep active in ensuring that our rates are sufficient to provide the services required, and therefore recommends that the board approve Ordinance 1303.
Thank you, Michael. The Finance Committee discussed this, and would you care, Standish, to report on that?
It's been quite a while, but my recollection is we went through all of the various options, starting with an 8% per year increase to get to break even, and frankly, we felt that was just too much of a burden. But wastewater has been losing money for quite some time, and I think the history is that we didn't have a rate increase for 20 years until the one that happened 4 years ago, and was negatively received by the largest customer at the time. So the Finance Committee, I think, correct me if I am wrong, felt that this 3.5% per year for 3 years was kind of a somewhat reasonable middle ground. And then the other thing we did is we said that the water and wastewater ought to be charged the same, because it's the same good that goes in.
Okay, well, I'd like to open the public hearing and invite the public to make comments on this matter. And Michael, if you could also just check for email. I don't know if anybody's online. Is there anyone in the public who would like to comment on this?
Chairman, there's no comments from the...
No comments.
There was a page.
What the cost is again on the wastewater,
What
what you're asking for, could you tell us?
Okay, so what the staff recommendation with the board packet, and this came from the Finance Committee as well, is several things. On water, the base rate would stay the same. That already increases by the CPI each year. That's currently, I think, $24 a month, approximately. But we would be instituting a new water usage rate, which is the same as the irrigation water rate, which is $4 per 100 cubic feet. Right, $4, yeah, per 100 cubic feet. So that'd be a brand-new cost to customers.
And that's mandated by.
And what's mandated is that we charge for usage. Okay.
And the $1.46 for the unit.
And then there'd be the $1.46 for the water portion of the meter.
So does page 72 here help with kind of framing this? Isn't that the intent of the thing? It says rate increase, actual bill comparison.
Yeah, but let me just to finish answering Maline's specific question. So there's the water part, okay? Then there's the wastewater part, and right now the recommendation that's come through to us on the packet after a lot of discussion, the Finance Committee and staff and so on, is that the wastewater right now has a base rate and it has a usage charge. The proposal is that the base rate continue to increase by,
3.5%.
so the base rate would increase by 3.5% each year for 3 years, and the consumption charge or the use charge would also increase by 3.5% each year for 3 years.
And after 3 years?
We'll have another hearing.
Well, we'll see where we are and how we're doing. Yeah.
I think the variation is demand and growth. So, we have a very sophisticated or required system that could service a lot more people. And so the more people it services, the more the costs are spread out. And that's the only way to bring down the cost of wastewater is to have more people, more customers.
So, to Bob's point, we have on page 72 of our packet an example of what the impact on a bill would be. This would be for a household that used 300 cubic feet in a particular month. 300 cubic feet of water. By the way, I looked at my last year's bill, and my peak use in our house was 210 cubic feet. So the 300 is probably a fairly reasonable number for a peak month. And what this would do, the current cost of that usage would be $89.38 for water and $24 for wastewater, and $24.14 for water. So that would be the cost. With the 3.5% wastewater increase, the $89 would increase to $94. So that's an increase of about $5. And the water would go from $24 up to $37.60. But that's really all because of this new usage charge. The use of water. Right now, we don't get charged for the use of water. We just get charged for how it's treated at the other end.
Right, so we're being
But,
charged for both.
but now now the state is mandating that we charge for use. The question is what we charge. And right here, it's what we now charge for irrigation, which is the it's treated, but it's just the water without being treated. I mean, treated at the back end, at the final end.
Rear end.
The rear end, yeah. So that's what it is. Bob Epstein, I know you said you had a question.
I just want to make sure this one statement's accurate. It's on page 40 of our board packet, and it's the notice of public hearing. And it says wastewater rates, this proposed annual increase would increase rates by 8% over the next 3 years. But the example shows increase from 30.31 to 32.74. Is that for 1 year or for just the first year?
So this notice of public hearing went out before we revised it.
Right, so I guess my point is the notice of public hearing states a proposal that we're actually not implementing. It's
Right. The public hearing states 8% per year over several years, which would more rapidly get us to a break even on a cash basis.
And that's what the Finance Committee.
And the Finance Committee is
Right.
recommending that we ratchet that back to 3.5% per year for 3 years.
Oh, okay. So I just wanted to make sure I understood that. And then I think the bigger question is, it's unfair, let's say, for a surplus in propane to pay for water because they're not the same customers necessarily. So it makes sense that every service we provide a customer is not borrowing money from another service, is not taking money. So our choice as a board is how we subsidize through the use of property taxes. And I think we're talking about two things here. One is the gradual standalone nature of each service. And we've decided, we're sort of talking today about not getting there in 12 months, but taking an extended period of time. But then the conversation we will have at a later date, we're planning a day just to talk about that, is what's the most appropriate use of property taxes to subsidize specific services that have an actual approach to that. And there's many things we could choose from. People who live here year-round and service the community have a lot bigger bills than I do, being here on occasion. Some services are different. What is the best public use of property tax, if any, as it applies to subsidizing various services? And obviously the larger utilities have base rate, lifeline rates. But in our case, the people who live here year-round can be bigger consumers than people who don't have a lifeline problem, if you will. And so it's a lot more complicated to figure out, for our community, what's the best public use of funds.
Especially if you want to make it affordable for employees.
Well, and that's kind of the point, is we'd like to have more full-time employees live here full-time, but it's expensive. And what should we do with property taxes and rates to help those people, if anything? And so I think that's the real conversation, is getting everything to being self-sufficient, but then figuring out if we should be doing subsidizing for certain categories or people.
Malene?
Do you have to have a public hearing in order to make decisions on how to use property taxes? Or is that something the board just makes that decision?
Traditionally,
we always discuss it.
Right,
We do discuss it, but it's not a public hearing like this is an official public hearing.
Yeah, I think our goal would be to look at everything, come up with some ideas, get community input, and then have an overall strategy that we would implement over some number of years to get there. Because we decided at the rate study for electricity that we would subsidize it to sort of level out this peak that's happening as we have both systems running, then come down. So we made that decision to smooth out a peak. And at some point we would, reevaluate that.
So, Michael, the increases as now being contemplated are sufficient to, at minimum, cover our new debt. Is that right?
For water, definitely. For wastewater,
The answer is no.
I don't think so, no.
No.
We're just
No,
making progress.
we have new debt expense in wastewater of $124,000 once it goes to a 12-month debt schedule. We're raising $47,000 with this, so no, we're not covering our debt expense for the membrane or the...
If I'm looking on page 54 for the year 2015,
That's water, 54.
that's water. Okay, wastewater.
55. It says our net
Yeah.
loss in 2015 will go from 275,000 net loss to 213,000. And of the 275, 124,000 is COP debt expense.
Right.
But even on just a gross margin basis, in 2015, without any adjustment, wastewater has revenue of 719,000, but expense of 870,000.
And that's
So
not...
it's what's called a bad business.
And that's not...
Operating plus debt service. You'd add into that.
Yeah, I was just talking about on an operating basis.
Right.
We have a negative gross margin.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, we have a very, for all the right reasons, we have a very sophisticated wastewater treatment system. that is potentially can handle, a larger load. And so in some sense, we're using property taxes to forward invest, so we have more capability and more redundancy. Because a failure in that system is actually worse than the transformer failing.
And the loss in operating is not a new thing. Wastewater's never paid for itself.
Okay, any other comments from the public? Millie?
Just a question about the wastewater. Is it harmful to the plant to operate at such a low capacity? I mean, are we, what? No? I mean, so we're not wearing out the membrane faster than we need to?
Okay, if there's no other comments from the public, I'd close the public hearing. Last chance, close the public hearing. Bring it back to the board. Any comments or discussion?
Seems like it's a reasonable approach to phase it in rather than doing it all at once. And wastewater has never paid for itself. We're a much more diversified district than we were in the old days when we used property taxes to balance what is an enterprise fund, which should stand on its own. But so I think this is a good approach. It's been recommended by the Finance Committee. And I'm prepared to move that we. I don't know if it's premature.
Sure,
but we follow their recommendations. Adopt the 3-year phase-in plan and of the rate increase.
So that would be the adoption of ordinance number 1303.
Correct.
Let me just get my right view here.
Get the right number on the ordinance.
1303, which is an ordinance of the Board of Directors of the Kirkwood Meadows Public Utility District adjusting water, sewer, and solid waste service rates. Bob Epstein.
I just want to confirm one other fact in this, is there's also a CPI increase that's built into this. So the rates will go up more than 3.5% because they're already built into the rate structure as a CPI increase of about 2%, if I remember.
It was 1%.
1%. So that's already part of the rate. So the increase would actually be 4.5%.
Right.
So I just wanted to make sure that was
Right.
understood.
Right. Okay, we have a motion to adopt ordinance 13-03. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
We move to a presentation, discussion, and possible action regarding the all services capacity analysis and water source investigation. Welcome, Matt.
Eric, I'm just going to use
Do you need me to stand back this side, or can I stand here and still be heard?
You can.
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
All right.
We have about a 1 minute break here.
Could we'll just take a
stretch break.
Several minute break here.
Growth projections, the outline, we're going to say what demonstrates the basis for the growth projections, focusing on water and wastewater, and water was the big deal project, which culminated in a source water investigation and some other side projects. Touch on the last four there: electrical, employee housing, fire, and propane. But again, skipping to the chase. This is all based on a specific plan, 2003 specific plan, and we're assuming build out of 2026 for this study. So all of those projections are just linear approach right there to simplify it. We're about halfway, half the size of build out right now. In wastewater, we've got waste discharge limits, and they're based on a peak day or a monthly average flow rate, and so both of those are limits that we need to keep. I don't want to do this again. But this is an example of our peak day flows from 2011 and 2012, and you can see that in 2011 we actually went over our plant capacity for peak day flows, which means we went into flow utilization storage. That'll come up a little bit later. As we project flows over time, here's what the old plant capacity was on a peak day, And then the hard lines here are on an average, monthly average. You can see those, how they grow up to that ultimate permitted capacity of the wastewater plant. Our collection system, we didn't evaluate, it's outside the scope of the capacity study. Our sewer pump stations, they're in good shape, we'll be able to meet their demands. And then our effluent disposal system is already sized for that build-out capacity. Flow equalization, we've got a couple of storage basins right now, 2 outside, 1 inside, and those have a combined total flow equalization storage of about 235,000 gallons. That gives us a little over 5 days during an average month, almost 3 days in a peak month usage right now. We want to keep that type of flow equalization storage. We want to maintain at least 3 days of storage during peak flows to give us that ability to do maintenance and things. So what that means is we're going to need to replace our emergency storage basin. It's at the end of its service life. And then come up with additional flow equalization storage. So we're going to need about 400,000 gallons of new or replacement storage to meet build out. We've got this project which is underway. I'm going to give a presentation on that a little bit later, but we're installing membranes to meet 120% of that ultimate permitted flow. Our plant capacity, 2 main pieces here. We've got the activated sludge plant as well as the membrane side. The activated sludge side of our treatment plant was already built to capacity, so we have 190,000 on an average in the peak day flows. Membranes are going in to exceed that. There's a little bit of interconnecting between these two that may need to be increased. Some upsizing of filter treat pumps and a couple of pipe sizing, but it's minimal. So for all intents and purposes, our wastewater plant, as of now, is up to our peak WDR limits. So we're in good shape. What we're missing, we're going to need to come up with about 400,000 gallons of flow equalization at some point. And we've got that return pumps and piping between the activated sludge system and the MBR. And then we had already identified the SCADA system upgrades, but elected not to do that as part of this membrane upgrade project. And our master plan could use an update. So that's wastewater. Any questions?
So at what point, Matt, do you think we could put some cost estimates to these for capital planning purposes?
We'll get it to you by the next meeting.
That's
So,
good enough?
and so Bob's point on the funding, you're absolutely right. As we grow and have more people contributing in rates, that's going to help close the gap on operational budget. But a good portion of this expansion is for capacity, and so tying fees are going to also help eat down the debt as well as pay for these additional fees. So those connection fees need to be factored in as paying down the debt, not just rates.
So when we get to estimating the cost of these things, I guess I haven't thought about it too much, but since we don't know, well, the time you could be some definition on the course. When you say you need a 400,000 gallon tank, you got to say when you need it, and that's going to define, in one respect, how much it costs. Or it's either going to be done in today's dollars, or we've got to estimate what it's going to cost 5 years or 10 years out from now. So I think we've got.
And also, do you do 200,000 and then another 200,000?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, good
Right,
point.
we've got that existing 65,000 tank that's that reached the end of its service life, so we might be wanting to put in 100,000 gallons or 150,000 gallons to replace it, and then project out the next big tank as we approach that growth curve.
Yeah, that's what's got to get down to the point where we're able to answer your question. We're going to take action A on date B, and it's going to cost C dollars. So you got to have a tabular view of that. So
Water. We're currently using about 21 million gallons a year, but looking at that as an annualized approach doesn't work for capacity. You need to meet your peak demand at the time of demand. And you meet that with your wells, you meet it with storage. And so you really need to be looking at this peak day flow, which projects out to a maximum day demand ultimately out here. This 298,000 gallons per day is your max day demand, and that's really going to drive all of the sizing of your storage, your wells, and your needs. So that translates to 42 million gallons is 129 acre feet. That's our ultimate year need. But again, that max day demand is 298,000.
Well done, Matt.
That's amazing.
So let's talk storage. There are three components to water storage, and they drive how much we need to project and have in our district. Fire storage, emergency storage, and operational storage. This fire storage is a requirement of our fire master plan. Operational emergency storage, we have ordinances in our specific plan to tell us what we need, and there they are. 3,500 gallons a minute for 4 hours is our fire storage requirement, and that translates to 840,000 gallons. Right now, we only have 950,000 gallons in storage, so most of our storage right now is fire storage, and we have a little bit of operational, very little emergency storage. And so for the ultimate demands, we need to come up with a total of 1.3 million gallons. A little bit more than that means we have a deficit of 350,000 gallons to meet the ultimate demand. On the supply end, we've got wells 2 through 5, and one of the projects that's culminated out of this study was the improvements that we just did to wells 4 and 5. So we'll touch base on that, but basically all our wells pumping now, after completion, we can get 324,000 gallons a day. We need 298,000 gallons a day. So with all our wells pumping, we can meet it, but firm capacity means you assume your largest facility is out of service. For us, that's well number 2. And that could be because it's got a pump broken, could be because it's been contaminated and we've lost it. And so projecting out firm capacity is the right approach to look at your ultimate needs. And so with that, we have a deficit of about 100,000 gallons a day. We need about 96 or 100 gallons per minute of additional source water to be met by another well or upsizing our wells, some fashion. We just did this project, the well 4-5. We removed a restriction in the line, so now we can pump both wells at the same time. Got us a long way to it, but we're not quite out of the woods yet. Here's how well supply versus demand looks. And again, this is all wells, assuming 18 hours a day, not firm capacity. We will meet demand, but when you look at firm capacity, if we take well 2 out of the equation, right here in 2017, we don't quite meet firm capacity if we're on the demand side. The other ways of solving that, though, would be to test our wells 4 and 5. We talked about doing a long-term aquifer test. Here's the results of our short-term pump test. We did 2.5 days of pumping into the system with our existing pumps. We achieved anywhere from 165 on down to 145 gallons a minute as the water drew down and as our tanks filled. But after 2.5 days, our tanks were full and we didn't want to just waste the water on the ground, so we stopped. And then that's the recovery over several days, a couple more pumping events on the way out. We never got anywhere near our pump intakes. Our pumps are set way down here at 0, where the pressure transducer is. This dark line up here is ground level. So our drawdown, not too bad, but again, only 2.5 days pump test. In order to really test this aquifer, we should be looking at a 10-day test and going out to atmosphere so that we can see how much gallons per minute we can truly get out of it and what kind of drawdown and recovery we get. Maybe we can come up with another 100 gallons a minute out of these tanks or out of these wells. But if not, there again are other ways to solve it. We looked at Caples Lake as source water. That was a big push at the beginning, and we did identify that there's 250 feet set aside with the State Water Board for Caples Lake, and it's really set up for us. I mean, we're the communities here in County of Orange. So we would be looking, if we wanted to fully satisfy all of our water rights needs for the district and not use wells, have wells that just be backup, we'd need to go for about 129 acre feet to meet that. But we could go for a portion of it, only use
Has left the conference.
And the steps to do that, we identified these in an earlier meeting. We identified these steps in an earlier meeting. Some of them have already been done. We've already talked to the agency who owns Caples Lake about entry and what it might take to get some waterworks for diversion structures. There are other interested parties that could seek those rights as well, and some of those have been contacted, and so far nobody indicates that they're going to have a protest. but there are still some steps that we're going to go out and secure those rights. We need to look at a project moving forward to do those things. So our needs. We need at least 360,000 gallons of additional storage, but if we had lower source capacity, let's say we only got another 50 gallons a minute out of our wells, we could increase storage to make up that deficit on a peak need, because we can pump it and have it for that peak long weekend. But add another well or increase our storage, talk about that, go after surface water and exercise our rights there. So our recommendations here are, let's go ahead and secure those rights to Cable's Lake and update our master plan. Electrical, this will be pretty quick. We're at 3.2, build out 10.1 according to the specific plan. And our existing diesel power plant is at 5.4, it could be occasional 8.4, and our Out Valley project is getting us to 10. So here's what that looks like. Right here, 2016, our peak demand is going to be right at our existing diesel plant. Now this growth projection is probably a lot flatter right now, but projecting it out at a 2026 end date, it gets us there. We're optimistically looking at 2014 having that Out Valley project done, so we meet our demand. Any questions on those? Okay, housing. All the Valley employers have provided housing, but they've got an excess, so it's underutilized. Not all of the employee housing is being used. For us, KMPUD, we've got 12 units, and ultimately we're going to need to provide another 12 units for projections of our own employee needs. And so that's another housing unit like we've got next door. All right, fire department. This is all based on 1998 master plan, and so some of the benchmarks that were identified in there, we've got a little bit of aging equipment, but so far fire service is going well. We've got 1 part-time staff and 10 volunteers, and according to the master plan, we should have a full-time staff and 12 volunteers by now. And so we also have mutual aid with some local districts, and there's our fire flow requirement out of the master plan, which drives most of our storage needs. What our projected needs are build out is we want to have 24-hour paid staff coverage. So that's 3 shifts of full-time, or the equivalent of it. 28 volunteers, and I couldn't see a definition for what a reserve was in the master plan, but it calls for 16 more reserves. We're going to need an additional pumper truck, and then based on ISO rating, we might need to get a ladder truck, given the height of some of the buildings. So we put that in there as an anticipated need, replacing one of the aging pieces of equipment, and it could also use an update. Questions on that?
If we did add another engine, do we have a place out of the snow to put it?
Chief?
Yeah.
There's
room.
stuff.
That's right.
Got room? Okay. And propane. So we're coming to the end here. We're existing use, our peak use is 3,200 gallons a day. Basically, we need to keep at least 10% of the volumes in the tanks to have vapor pressure, but also account for a road closure. So existing, we need to maintain at least 21,000 gallons in the tank so that we can ride out along road closure during peak demand. For projected build out, our demand might double. And so that means with a 10% volume plus 5-day road closure, we need to have 37,000 gallons always in the tank so that we can ride out along road closure. That, with our current storage volume, is only 1 truckload. So we should put in another bulk storage, 30,000 gallon tank, so that we can have 6 days of operational storage in there.
And remind me, what's the volume of our current storage?
We've got 50,000.
Okay. So we need 30,000.
Another 30 gives us 6 days operational storage in there. And that completes it.
Well, from my point of view, this is exactly what we need at this point.
Yeah.
And along with the costing and so on, estimates and so on, timing. And then that will really give us the information I think we need to start understanding where the funds might come from over what period of time to actually do these things and explore a number of possibilities from the connection fees to discussions with the counties to grants to whatever. Yeah.
So staff will be working with now to the two main questions that remain, and that's when and how much.
Any questions or comments from the audience?
I think that was well done.
Yeah, one of the nice things I think that comes out of this is it doesn't seem like it's that overwhelming in terms of the number of elements, things that have to be put in place over a period of time ahead of us. I was kind of concerned that, it would look like it was a giant mountain that would be difficult to climb, but it looks like it's a fairly tractable.
Well, when we went into this, I really thought that water was going to be the difficult thing, and it may still have its difficulties, but there's certain good possibilities. Now I think it's the fire protection that's really going to be the difficult one.
Well, that's a good
Probably
point.
most
When we
challenging.
started this, I was thinking of it more as a capital investment kind of a question, and there is capital investment required in fire, but if the complementary piece is more of an expense item, like you got to have
Staffing,
personnel to go along with a complete solution in that space, that's another element we're going to get into.
Okay, any other comments? Thank you for that, Matt. I know you're still up, right?
Yes, I am.
For item 8G, which is an update on the installation and warranty conditions of new coke membranes being installed at the wastewater treatment plant.
All right. This has been a fun little project. Pales in comparison to the Out Valley. But little project status report. So I'll show you where we are in schedule and a couple of pictures of construction progress. We know some forecast O&M items, but then we're going to really focus on the warranty issue. That was a question that came up with staff, and I know that the board is very interested in that as well. So we focused a lot of this presentation on that piece. Project schedule, the startup and commissioning of Train 2 happened this week. Coke membranes technicians have demobilized from the site. We are making effluent with both trains now, and so it's in its proving grounds. We're going to go the next 2 weeks looking over final punch list and inspections, and so for all intents and purposes, we might be done. Here's what it looked like. The old racks and headers for our old membrane system, those have been removed, and these are the parts that went in, some hangers and tubes. And so what you see are one of the hangers here for the new membrane module rack, and then the headers were extended down to push mixed liquor out across the bottom, and then to draw filtrate up here from the top. Our new 2-ton crane pulling those membrane cartridges in. If you remember what the old ones looked like, they were narrow racks, long racks, and these are a big cartridge and requires the larger crane getting set down in the tank, and then that's what it looks like in the tank. So there's a lot more room on the sides. The old racks were longer and narrower, and we had enough room there for about 10 of them, and only 3 in each train. But these are a more compact space taker, so we've got a lot more room in that MBR tank. The aeration cycles on these. The old system had 24-hour air on the membrane racks. This will cycle on and off every 60 seconds between the racks. And so what it's using is just one blower instead of dedicated blower for each tank. One blower just alternates between the 2 tanks, and they alternately rest and backwash. But you'll see that also showed us that we've got additional maintenance now on some of our valves. Some of our valves, which didn't cycle, they always were left in the open position, are now having to cycle every 60 seconds. And so that's an unforeseen item that some of these control valves. Additionally, we weren't too surprised by these things, but some of these other items came up that were ancillary to the project, and so I'll go through a few of them. Chemical dosing pumps and some of the valves on there weren't working from the last system. We had to replace or repair those. Our backwash tank level switches, this one was a little bit low, and so the outlet to that tank would actually let air in before the low-level switch would indicate that the tank was empty. So it was letting air in the system, causing problem. We fixed that with some float switches that we dropped in the top. And then the CIP tank, which was outside, those switches had been broken off by snow. Turned out that these switches in the backwash tank were the same ones. We pulled them out, put them in out there for initial startup, but they're old. Some of them, one of them's already broken, and so we're going to be replacing with a more stout piece of equipment. All that has gone on though over the last couple of weeks, and they've been able to program the system, so they're just waiting for us to get the new switches, and then we'll be ready for our recovery cleans. And then again, these control valves, this is one of the air valves that has to cycle on and off. Some of these have been giving us trouble, and they've been rebuilt a couple of times now during the project. We're going to need to have some spare parts on the shelf and be ready to do some additional maintenance on these older valves. So that's part of our forecast, increased maintenance frequency and having standby equipment. We're going to have reduced electrical consumption though, because our blowers, again, we're only using one membrane blower instead of two at all times, and so we should see some energy savings there. But there's additional sampling and monitoring requirements that's been identified in the O&M manual. I'll get to that a little bit later. A couple of punch list items we're aware of. The clean in place tank is an outside tank, and it needs to be used only once every 6 months, but if we're going to put water in that tank in the winter, we're going to need to heat that water to keep it from freezing, and also to have it at a temperature which is useful for backflush cleaning. So that heater we've identified as something we might need to fix. There's some air release tank vacuum pumps, the flow meters on the MBR supply. The old airflow meters are a slow response time. The air was always on to those tanks, so they take about a minute or two to ramp up to full flow measurement, and then whenever flow's turned off, it takes about a minute or two for those to come down. The cycles are faster than those flow meters can respond, so we need to look at something that's got a 1 or 2 second response time flow meter for that system to operate accurately. And then, here's the checklist. This is the next item for us. And so, going into the warranty, any questions so far?
Yeah, on the previous, when you call it punch list items, these are things, normally a punch list, I mean, the way I think of it is it's something that the contractor under their current contract still owes us. But I think the way you're talking about it, these would be
You're right.
extra costs. There are things that we should look into or do, but they're not in the contract, they're extra costs.
I've blended them here, you're right. Because some of these things we are self-performing on, the CIP tank heater and some float switches, they're ancillary to the membranes. Some of these membrane checklist items are going to be actual punch list items, so I've blended them here. So our warranty, we've got a 60-month warranty, and it's prorated after the first year. It starts upon initial conditioning, so as soon as those membranes hit water, the clock started ticking on the warranty timeline on it. But it is a performance guarantee, and it covers the membranes themselves, not installation. So if we did have to have a replacement, they'd ship us a new cartridge. We'd have to pay for the install. However, the O&M manual they gave us has a lot of disclaimers and terms in it, so we read it. It said, okay, what maintains our warranty and keeps it in force? And as we went through it, there are a whole lot of checklist items for startup and initial conditioning that need to be verified and documented. And so we're putting all these back on the contractor, making sure that Coke and Auburn, who did all these installs, did all of these pieces, input signals and bump testing the motors and documentation of it, so that before we accept the project as complete, we have checkoff from them that our membrane is still, our warranty is still in force. And then we get down to maintenance, which comes back onto us and what we need to do to keep the membrane warranty in force. So there's cleaning logs, there's a whole list that we've generated from this O&M manual with a lot of questions for them, because what's been installed and what they've told us about needing to report to them versus what's in this book have differed. And so we've got a memo to them that says, hey, here's what we're reading in the book, and it talks about things like COD testing twice per week, and influent on the influent and effluent, and then sending out to a lab. We do VOD testing. We do it on a different frequency than this as part of our compliance monitoring for the Regional Water Board. So the question is, do we have to start doing the COD testing to maintain the warranty, Or is our existing program at BOD testing and frequency going to be sufficient? Get an official answer from them, and then we know how to move forward. Same thing, we've got mixed liquor, solids testing, and all kinds of reporting that's on a monthly basis, but this is tracking that we need to do in the plant. And again, we need official verification of what they will require to be reported to them, or if there's changes in the program that we can document, so that as we move forward, we know whether or not we need to keep a visitor's log. Because right now, according to the manual, if we don't produce a visitor's log, if we try and exercise a warranty claim, and they ask for all 5 of these logbooks, and we don't have a visitor's log, that could void the warranty. So, again, official response, do we have to have a visitor's log or not? If we do, we'll develop a program and keep it. But that's what's going on right now, and that's the big push here in the last 2 weeks to make sure that before we accept it, we've got official response and a check off on that.
From a staff perspective, is there anything in these warranty activities that, other than the questions you've just noted, that either see unreasonable, or does it mean our staff is going to get overloaded in some fashion, or they're all doable?
Very doable, and my task that I gave to Matt was to make sure that we have a clear understanding of what our warranty is, so that we don't have any questions in the future when we want to replace these membranes, or if we have a problem.
Most of these things are good practice, and we ought to be doing them. But we also recognize the difference between good practice and a warranty requirement. And so I'd like to see our staff doing more of this type of operation and understanding their biology. And it would make them more operator and less maintenance mechanic on the parts if they did these things. Some of them are being done again. But we'll get an official response from Coke as to what needs to happen with the warranty documentation. We'll get submitted to them. So as part of this, we've started preparing templates for them. We know that they're going to be going through maintenance cleaning, recovery cleans, and daily checklists, and they're spelled out in here what you have to report, but putting together a template for operators to be able to use, circle the membrane train that you're going to be doing the maintenance or recovery clean on, and all the recordable parameters before and after, so that this is ready to go and be faxed or scanned and emailed to Coke. Any questions?
Very good. That was a really good review. And any questions, Matt? You're pleased with the project, I gather.
It's going well.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Welcome to the conference call. Please input your access code followed by the pound key. At the tone, please record your name for announcement to the call organizer, and then press the pound key to enter your conference. You will now enter the conference. The subscriber has not yet arrived at the conference call. If you are the subscriber, please press the star key now. Please enter your subscriber PIN followed by the pound sign. Arrived.
Hi, Scott. We're at your agenda item. Thanks for calling in.
Hi, everybody.
Welcome, Scott. Okay, we are now moving to agenda item 8H, which is discussion of possible approval of the district's financial audit for the 2012-2013 fiscal year. And welcome, Scott and Michael.
On April 13th of this year, the board approved that was the previous one. On May 24th, 2013, the board accepted the proposal from AKT for $34,000 to complete the 2013 audit. Scott Daniels with AKT is here today to present the audit for the board's review. Scott?
Great. Let me know if you guys have any trouble hearing me, but we're going to do, I think, Michael, do you have the PowerPoint presentation then?
Yes, it's up and it's ready to go.
Okay, so I think in your board packet you received, there were 2 documents related to the audit. One is a letter to the board of directors. The other is the audited financial statements. And included then in the bound audited financial statements are a couple of new letters that are required by the Rural Utility Service that I will address. But if you go into kind of the first page on this, we'll kind of talk about the contents, and then we'll move into the discussion a little bit. I'll try to make this brief. I know you guys have a really full agenda, and Michael had kind of given us a little bit of a time frame to work from. So we're going to move quickly, but if anybody who's had a chance to look at the statements has questions, please speak up, and I'll obviously try to stop during my presentation to take any questions, and at the end we can discuss those items as well. So on this page with contents, the first item is audit results. That will be just a quick overview of the board letter. That letter is a required communication to kind of wrap up the audit, and there's specific things we're required to communicate in that letter, and we'll touch on the highlights of that. We'll do an overview of the financial statements. I'm going to take a quick second to just talk about what's in the financial statements. And that's really just an overview based on kind of the governmental accounting standards, what we have to report on and include in these financial statements, which is a little different than what you see on an ongoing basis throughout the year, where you look at things, from what the district has versus maybe how this looks and how we have to present it to have things in accordance with GAAP. We'll touch on just quickly some highlights from 13, and then I'll do an overview of these letters required by RUS. Go ahead and move to the next page, Michael. So the next page that I have is the results of the audit. Again, most of this is what's in the board letter. Now, there's a lot in the board letter that I don't have on here because it's required communications, and it discusses whether there are any substantial changes from one year to the next in accounting principles or accounting estimates, or whether there's any difficulties, disagreements with management, those kinds of things. And really, those items, we didn't have findings or things that we need to communicate in order to have you understand the statements from one year to the next. So this slide really goes through some of the key items. The first is our opinion on the financial statements. And then again, we disclose in the board letter, but then we get into the actual financial statements. We have our independent auditor report that contains our opinion, but you've received an unmodified or clean opinion, which is the highest form of assurance. And there was a standard, an auditing standard that changed a little bit of the wording of the independent auditor's report. It didn't change the content per se, but it tried to lay out the responsibilities of management and the auditor a little bit differently. And it also, we now refer to, when you get a clean opinion, no qualifications, it's now called an unmodified opinion versus an unqualified opinion. If you've been on the board before, you've heard that term, unqualified opinions. That is now referred to as unmodified opinion. So that's what you want to get on the financial statements, and it means that we think you can rely on these financial statements based on our audit. Another area we are required to communicate is related to internal controls, and this will be spelled out in the RUS letters. One of the letters we have is report on internal control compliance, and we'll go through kind of what's in that. But we do have what we call a material weakness, and this material weakness is basically related to a combination of things during the audit. And just at a high level, basically what we have is there are adjustments that we made that had a material impact on the financial statements. And what you'll see is they weren't necessarily material impact entity-wide, but we're required to provide opinions at the fund level. And there were just some things that we had to do between allocations, and a lot of it had to do, and we'll get into kind of the audit adjustments in a second, but when the balances were brought into the new system from the old system, there were some things that were set up a little bit differently. They didn't flow straight across. That had to do really with a couple of things. Some of it is just the amount of detail that was in the new system compared to the old, and some of that was going with really using the new general fund, the government general fund, to run a lot of the cash transactions through. But there were some changes made, and really we need to see that these need to reconcile from year to year. Fund balance or net assets from year to year need to flow. So we had to make some fairly substantial adjustments to get the individual fund statements correctly. Again, that's not something that I think will be huge issues moving forward without the transfer in accounting systems, but something that, because it resulted in material adjustments we had to note in the internal control letter. There were no material items of non-compliance. Again, this is related to a large degree to RUS. They have us, just in general, when you have governmental funding, there's compliance requirements, and then RUS has very specific things that we're required to look at. A lot of it has to do with the construction activity and is it being accounted for properly and all the costs being accumulated. And at this point, obviously, you're still going through the construction, but we do test that activity, and we had no non-compliance, no material non-compliance items that we were required to communicate in our letters to RUS. I mentioned the adjustments already. There were 22 adjustments during the audit, and this kind of highlights the biggest ones. And there were several that related to the beginning balance differences and trying to get those back to where everything flows from the prior year audit statements into the current year statements as beginning balances. There's several places where we have beginning balances, whether it's in the statements or the notes. So those are some of the entries, and then there was some transfers of activity between funds and departments related to property taxes, interest expense. And then now, again, with all of the activity that flows through the general fund, there's an allocation that gets made of that activity, and a lot of it is expenditures that you make and where getting those in the right fund or department. And that, we made some adjustments related to that. And then property tax receivable, and again, that was mostly due to timing in terms of getting that property tax information. So looking at, when we get into the statements, what you'll see is a couple of significant things that are flowing through, and most of it, the biggest thing from a numbers perspective is obviously the RUS loan activity, and that includes the construction activity as well as the related debt, and then the reporting requirements with these two new letters. And then the other thing with the accounting system conversion, you're going to see a few things in terms of where some numbers are, and that there's some more cash in the governmental funds, a little bit more activity that's flowing through those governmental funds, and then there's some allocations and transfers being made that we didn't have in the past. And then that also impacted the way your internal statements were set up. The categories and classifications in there are a little bit different. So we tried to have these statements match those. So not so much at the entity-wide financial statements or government-wide financial statements, but when you get into some of the fund financial statements, some of the categories that you'll see are different than what they were last year, and that was really us trying to, one, utilize your system, but also have it match what you get from an internal perspective. So that kind of takes care of really the result. Again, a cleaner unmodified opinion. We do have a material weakness we noted, which is basically just this accumulation of adjustments that we made, and a lot of those related to these historical balances and how they're brought into the new system, and then just some of the transfers or allocations of activity between the funds. And then again, just the RUS loan activity and some of the things that go with that. So are there any questions on any of that?
Any questions? No, that's pretty clear, Scott. Thanks.
Okay. Moving on to the next slide then. I'm going to move through these fairly quickly, but what I want to be sure is that everybody understands kind of what's in these statements. And again, you guys as a governmental entity are required to follow statements from the Government Accounting Standards Board, and GASB 34 deals with financial reporting for governmental entities. And so the way your statements are set up are really dictated by that standard. And so first you have these government-wide statements that focus on the entity as a whole, but they're broken down between governmental activities and business-type activities, and the structure of those statements really flow from GASB 34. Then in addition to government-wide, we break those down into governmental fund statements that focus on just the governmental activities, and that's on a little bit different than just a straight accrual basis. So when you get into that, we call modified accruals. When you get into the governmental statements, capital expenditures become a expense or expenditure item that flows through the statement of revenues and expenditures, as opposed to depreciation expense, which is what you see on the government-wide. So that's really the main difference there. We have the proprietary fund statements that have to be shown separately that show the business-type activities. And you'll see and again, they flow from those individual fund statements into the government-wide statements. And then the last thing we have kind of from the statement side is the fiduciary fund statement, which deals with the Mello-Roos and those being pass-through dollars, and it just reflects kind of what the cash related to Mello-Roos and then the related liability is. Go ahead and move to the next one, because it's kind of a continuation of what's kind of included in the statement. Again, then we have the notes to the statements, and again, we'll talk about what some of the key disclosures are, but just more detail on the financial statements are included in the notes. And then in addition to the required financial statements in the notes, in addition then there are what we call required supplemental information, or RSI, and that's really on a governmental basis. For the government funds, we have to show budget to actual. So you'll see the budget to actual information in there that's broken out, by the fire department, parks, or mosquito abatement. And again, that's required, what's called required supplemental information. And then in addition to that, we have some supplemental information which breaks down things by department. And so it's not just from a budget to actual, but again, we go through the governmental and proprietary fund departments and show really the revenue and expense levels for each one of those departments in the supplemental information. And then the last item are the RUS letters that we've talked about that are now required because of the loan. So that's kind of what the structure of the statements are and the things that are required to be included. And then I'll just take a quick second to touch on the highlights. And again, I've kind of touched on those, but if we move on to the next slide, which are highlights for 2013. First, the statement of net position. So this is really your assets, liabilities, and what we call now net position, which can either be fund balance for a governmental fund or net assets on a proprietary fund. On the governmental side, if we look at this, a lot of what's driving the changes are kind of two things. One is a little bit with the new accounting system and the level of detail and running more of the activity through this general fund. There's been some impacts to the governmental side. You'll see there's quite a bit more cash there. And then in addition, there's this interfund payable. A lot of it has to do with the activity and where it is recorded, and then getting the cash to the general fund to make a lot of the expenditures, and then they get allocated back to the departments. But with that cash being in the governmental fund, you'll see some differences. So from last year to this year, assets have increased by $868,000, and most of that is cash. Liabilities have increased. Most of that's related to what we call an interfund payable, which is just a payable out of governmental to the business side. So things that you might not really be looking at on a entity-wide basis throughout the year. And then net position actually increased by $390,000. And we'll take a look at the statement of revenues and expenditures and what's driving that. But for the most part, it's the level of property taxes that are included there. And then during the year, this includes it includes revenues and expenses, but also includes what we call other sources and uses. And in this case, allocations and transfers back and forth between one fund to the other have a lot to do with that. And this year, just again with the new accounting system, and now that we have, and again in the past, everything kind of went directly to one fund or the other. Now we're using this general fund to do a lot of the expenditures, and so it creates these allocations and transfers. And in the current year, there's just these transfers that are flowing into the governmental fund, and that relates to really the movement of cash and some assets. And that has really resulted in kind of this increase in net position for the governmental fund. On the business type side, while some of the cash that we might have had last year is over on the governmental fund, there is a big increase in the cash balances and assets overall, and the business type funds, and that has a lot to do with just as you're borrowing money for RUS, some of that has not been spent, and so you've got an increase in cash. You've also got your construction work in process related to the Out Valley project that you're working on. So assets are up $5 million. Liabilities are up $5.9 million, and most of that really relates to the loan activity, the RUS, the Certificate of Participation loans, and the Bank of the West loans. And the net position is decreased. And again, it becomes a little bit more difficult last year to this year, to kind of talk about fluctuations because the categories are different, and we've got things flowing through the general fund and being allocated. When we get there, you can look through the statement, but effectively this year there was a decrease on the business type of 882 and an increase on the governmental of 390. Some of that is the actual activity in the business type funds, And some of that's really created by the allocation of expenses and also these transfers of assets from one fund to the other, which was almost 400,000 of this change. So really almost all the positive net change in governmental and about half of the business type were really related to these transfers that we have to account for to move assets from one fund to the other. So moving on to the state of activities and changes in that position. I've touched on a lot of these things already, and again, a lot of what you're going to see is really reflecting some of these changes again. So on the governmental side, it shows an increase in expenses, and that's because all those activities flowing through the general fund or G&A expense, and it becomes an expense in the governmental fund and then an allocation out, which is down other financing sources. And again, it's one of those things that from a governmental perspective, how it gets treated, it's a little harder to follow because you're kind of increasing expenses one place and then allocating it out in another place, and it makes it a little more difficult sometimes to get a handle on it, and that's why when we get into, I think as we move forward, we'll work with Jill and kind of getting those departmental statements so we can take those all the way from revenues, expenses, and allocations to get down to so you can, and you can really see how each department's doing. It becomes a little more difficult on the entity-wide statements because of this kind of activity. On the business type side, expenses increased. A lot of that is, increases in, when you go by the department, it's on the electric side. There's some increases in salaries and benefits. Depreciation is probably individually the biggest increase in the expense side. And again, there was also an increase in revenues. Electric revenues were higher. There are smaller increases in propane, water, and wastewater. And then again, what we call the non-operating revenue expenses include a variety of things. There was slightly lower property tax allocation to the business type. Interest expense with the increased loan funds, so interest expense increased. And then as we mentioned, the transfers going out of the business type into the governmental are flowing through those non-operating revenues and expense items. I don't know if anybody had a chance to look at the actual statements or have any questions. Again, I think what we've seen is really the impact of the RUS loans and the construction activity. And then for this year, what you're going to see is some fluctuations that were driven by kind of the new accounting system and some of the transfers and allocations that if we move forward next year, I don't think we shouldn't see some of those same types of differences, and we'll have a little bit more comparable statements both in terms of where things are and also we'll have categories that look the same, and we'll be able to talk about that in a little bit different fashion. The next slide is kind of the notes of the financial statements. Again, when you go past the financials, then we have the footnotes. And this was just kind of summarizing some of the key disclosures. The first one is, included in here is a description of the reporting entity, kind of who Kirkwood Meadows is and what they do. And then really there's a lot in terms of the accounting policies they have to follow, which really are driven by those governmental accounting standards and talk about the entity-wide and the fund balance type activities that you have. When you get into the detail, then there's some detail on cash and investments, and this includes some of the restrictions. So we've got included in those restrictions are really the RUS funds, which are restricted for construction activities. There are some additional cash balances that are restricted to be used for debt payments, and then you have some cash that's related to the fish funds that are kind of restricted as to their use. So when you look at the notes, we've got to have the cash broken down by categories, and part of that is that restricted cash. Detail on the capital assets. There's one of the notes basically is a reconciliation of the beginning to ending capital assets with increases, the additions that you're making and any decreases, and those are broken down by kind of the governmental and business type activities. Long-term debt, a pretty long footnote, gives the details of the terms of the various notes, interest rates, payments, those kinds of things, and it's broken down by your different loans with the COP, RUS, and Bank of the West. There's also quite a bit of a description during the year of what took place. That includes kind of the new borrowings, paying off the prior loans. It includes kind of the level of the RUS, the $50 million commitment, and then how much of that commitment is still unadvanced at the end of the year. So that's all included in the long-term debt. And then really the other significant note is the pension plan, which describes that and then details the level of contributions that were made. So that's really the key items that are in the footnotes attached to the financial statement. And again, if anybody has questions, just let me know.
I don't see any hands up at this
Okay.
point.
And really the last item that's in here then are the RUS letters, and these are, again, new this year. And there's two letters. One is an independent auditor's management letter. And again, this is required by RUS, and when we perform an audit for RUS, we have to follow RUS Part 1773, which is their audit standards. As part of that Part 1773, there are some very specific procedures that were required to perform during the audit, and those procedures are really what this management letter is there for. It's fairly long, but the form of that letter is really dictated by RUS, and it's our way of communicating to them the findings that we have based on the compliance. And really the only thing that's significant in that letter is one of the things they talk about is kind of the financial reporting and accounting records, and we talked about kind of this what we had as a material weakness from that kind of an aggregate based on having to make material adjustments. And so, again, we make a comment in this letter that refers to the other letter, the report on internal control and compliance, and the fact that we felt there was a material weakness because of the significance of the adjustments that we made to the individual funds. So that's really the only thing that, when you go to that whole letter, that's really significant that we're putting in that letter. The other letter is a report on internal control and compliance. And again, this is required by governmental auditing standards, and in effect it's required by RUS in addition, because RUS money is considered federal money. So when you get an RUS loan, then you have to follow governmental auditing standards, and this report on internal control and compliance becomes required. So again, on this slide, again, we noted internal control matters, and we'll touch on kind of what those were, but I think and we'll move through that quickly because I've already done that. But again, there were no compliance issues noted, so again, we didn't have any issues that we put into this report on internal control and compliance related to complying with your RUS loan or effectively some of the governmental standards that are out there when you get this money. So the last things I have were just a little bit of detail on the internal control matters, and these are spelled out in the letter. And again, individually, these things probably wouldn't be as significant. I think that the first two that are on page 10 of the slide are kind of the two main ones. One is accounting and financial reporting, and the other kind of results around or relates to the what we call historical balances and the way things are brought in. But the comment in the letter deals with two things in our accounting and financial reporting, and one is that APT as the auditor cannot be part of the internal control system. So if we're making adjustments or reconciling accounts, which we did to some level, not as, again, I want to make sure everybody knows too that, we're sitting here, a couple months earlier than last year. Things were, a lot better than they were the first year going through the audit process in terms of, I think, the communication was better. What Jill and her staff had together for us was substantially, more complete, and they had a much better understanding of what we were going to do. I think now we had, the big thing this year was the huge impact that the new accounting system had, both in terms of workload, but also just changing the approach to how some things were done had an impact this year that I fully anticipate, things being, even further along next year, and that what we'll be focusing on will be a little bit different, not having to deal with some of those issues that came from the new system and the activity that related to that. So with that said, we are preparing the financial statements, and we cannot be considered part of the internal control systems. Now, if that's the only thing we had, we'd still have a comment, but that in and of itself, and especially when we deal with RUS, they don't even see that as an issue. We've got to do it under our audit standards, but I want to make sure that, that's not considered a big issue, because we do that for most of our clients, go in and prepare the statements. It's just easier in a lot of cases, especially under the governmental side. The GASB requirements are pretty extensive, and It just makes more sense to rely on us. However, when we do that, we have to put this comment in. If that was the only comment we have, we wouldn't have a material weakness, though. So really, that's been created by the material adjustments made, and most of that relates to these, at the bottom of the page, is historical balances that we've already kind of touched on. Again, with the new software system, there were just some balances that were brought in and kind of moved around a little bit differently based on kind of how things were going to be done in the new system. However, that created some problems being able to reconcile from the prior year statements through to the current year statements, and so we had to make some adjustments to that. So that's really what the bulk of those two items are for, and what created the material weakness. And then the last page, these are both items that are in the letter, but these are less significant. Again, I think there are things that we wanted to bring to your attention, but they're more recommendations. And one relates to kind of, when I say capital assets, it's really related to construction and the use of a work order system. Right now, what you do would work. I mean, you set up an individual account for each project. Generally, what we see with our utility clients and what we see with RUS borrowers is what we call a work order system, where a work order is established. And in that work order system, it's got kind of a summarization of all the activity that can be payroll and overheads. If you've got your own inventory, the materials pulling into that, also any vendor invoices. But it is a real concise summary of the work order with all the activity then kind of attached. And it's what RUS kind of likes to see. So even though I think they could come in, when you have an RUS auditor come in, they can work with what you have, doing something from more of a formal work order system that we generally see, and that I think you can have in your system. That is something that usually just makes things easier in working with RUS. It's not something that if they come in, they'll work with you and whatever you have, and as long as you have the supporting documentation, you'll get there. It just might take a little bit more work on your side. So that was really the reason in terms of putting that comment in, was maybe kind of really what RUS is used to seeing and trying to kind of help that process out. And the last just relates to property taxes. Again, we had some adjustments with that, and part of that was some of the allocations between departments not being done, and then the property tax receivable was not recorded. And I know that there's some timing issues with when we did the audit and when some of that was available. I think part of from the audit side came that once we got the property tax receivable number, we didn't really get kind of the last adjustment, and then the allocations between departments fell a little bit later, so it created us making some changes late. So the more timely we can get that information on the receivables and then have the allocations done just a little bit smoother, things will go from an audit perspective. So again, that's everything that I had. I'm happy to take questions. Again, there were still some bumps, obviously, with the new system. We kind of anticipated that. Also, with the level of activity with RUS and construction, we knew there'd be, obviously things that we'd be focused on. But I think, again, from the process side, we were really pretty much done by the end of September versus kind of early December last year, and the level of stuff we got from your staff was greatly enhanced from the year prior.
Well, thank you, Scott. I'm going to ask Standish if he has any comments as treasurer.
I have one question, and maybe we can talk about process here. One is, Scott, on page 2, you basically say of your introductory letter that the Government Accounting Standards Boards require us to do a management discussion and an analysis, and we haven't done one. Can you address that, please?
Well, yeah, so under government accounting standards, there's kind of two things that require supplementary information. One is the MD&A, and the other is the budget actual. It's not uncommon, though, for most of our districts to not do an MD&A. It's a fairly substantial document that when it's not included, I have yet to see any repercussions to it. So what that is really goes through, and there's kind of a format, but it's usually several pages, anywhere from 3 or 4 pages to 6 or 7 pages, that just talks about all these different things in terms of the activities that the district's undertaking, and financial highlights and results. And it can be fairly cumbersome. Again, cities and some of our larger organizations do the MD&A, but a lot of them do not, just because of the time constraints. But because it's part what we call required supplementary information, or RSI. When it's not included, we have to highlight that in our report. However, I've not yet to see anybody, when they have not included that, have any issue with that. So, we don't usually push real hard to have people do it unless it's something they think will be meaningful to some user of the financial statement. Does that make sense?
No, because it's required, but we didn't do it, and there are no repercussions? I mean, it sounds like a silly requirement.
Well, GASB requires it, but unless there's somebody who gets your statement that thinks it's going to provide them that information, they're just not going to come back and ask for it.
So I don't know what you want to do in terms of process. Last year, this was kind of reviewed in fair detail by the Finance Committee, and we had a call directly with AKT to follow up. My personal view is the Finance Committee is more equipped to do that in terms of the background of the members than the board. So I've read this. I've got a number of questions that might fall into Finance Committee consideration. I think this may be far enough along that the board could approve it, but what would you like to do or propose doing at this point?
Yeah, because of timing, I wanted to get it before the board because we'll be presenting this to the State Controller's Office next week. But I fully anticipate having a discussion at the Finance Committee and then a separate phone call with Scott at that time.
And that would be not to adjust the audit, but that would be looking forward to the next year and
Yeah, I
processes and
miswrote
those
in
kinds of things.
the board doesn't actually approve the audit, the board just actually reviews the audit. It's a separate independent report that is presented. So the agenda, the board doesn't have to actually approve the audit.
Okay. So we have...
It's a very different audited report from anything we've seen in the last 2 years. Just because of this RUS stuff and the...
Yeah. Well, I thought it was pretty... It's not like I've read every single word and understood every word, but I thought it was pretty clear overall. For me, anyway, as a layperson reading it. And I'm assuming that from the comments and everything and statements that things are in pretty good order.
I would love to come to this meeting next year and not have, material weaknesses. And so at least at the Finance Committee level, I'd like to understand,
right,
how much of it was the beginning data versus the new system, and how we come up with a procedure where we don't have a material weakness coming.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, that's important. That's the one thing that stood out was because that shows up multiple times as the internal controls, material weakness and internal controls. And I just don't know how much of that is just kind of technical detail that's not really significant. It just is in audit language it is, but in real world it isn't, or how much it is significant. That's still not really clear to me.
Well, let me just touch on one thing with that. I mean, I think there's it's significant from an audit perspective. It's less significant, I think, in terms of a management perspective. So when I look at internal controls, there's kind of two elements to the internal control side. One is safeguarding assets. The other is financial reporting. And from a safeguarding of assets, we aren't coming in with comments in terms of that there's not good controls in place, that your assets are susceptible to theft or fraud. We don't have those kinds of comments related to control. So then we move over to financial reporting, and then there's again a couple different things we're looking at. One would be, are things being done to manipulate the financial reporting records? And so there's two ways things can be misstated. One is by errors, the other is irregularities. We're not coming in again looking at anything saying we think there's risk based on the way things are done, that things are being done to cover up irregularities to make you look better than you are. This really comes down to kind of one element, and it's related to financial reporting and the fact that we have, the system changes created some of that, but some of that is there's a little bit of a disconnect between what we do at an audit level, what we're required to do under the GASBs and how these financial statements are formatted versus I think how things are done internally and looked at. So again, we had to come down and break these things down into the proprietary funds, the the governmental funds, and they have to flow from one year to the next. We can't have changes to beginning net asset balances and things. I think as we went through that perception was a little bit different internally as they moved things over, and it was just, well, we can kind of put this here because that's how we're going to do this going forward. But it had an impact from our financial reporting aspect, and so it was a little maybe understanding of kind of how the implications of what was being done with the new system, and starting to do things differently than you have in the past, and how that might impact the financial statement. So I don't think it was a huge issue day to day, but it can create, this financial reporting issue when we come in and have to issue GAAP-based financial statements.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good. Any other comments from the board? From the audience? So I guess we can say now that we've reviewed the audit.
Yes.
Yes.
And the finance, this will be going before Finance Committee for further discussion.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Scott. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay.
And left the conference.
Okay, we now move to item 9, manager reports. Michael, general manager report.
Thank you. The district continues to work on the policies and agreements and procedures for a development project and conduct weekly meetings on current projects. Pages 148 and 140 and through 150 of in your packet shows an agenda and update on the current projects that were currently are going on in the including the completion of the Rec Center Phase 2, work on the Timber Creek Townhome project. Renwick Housing is going from electric to propane heat. The Mountain Club bathrooms is being updated to include, I think, 4 new bathroom stalls. Ticket kiosk is being built over by the Mountain Club stairs. An umbrella bars is planned for the Mountain Club deck area. And then there's several other single-family homes, etc. As part of the development process, the district has put on out our annual notification of deadlines for construction activities beginning on October 15th, so there won't be any excavations after October 15th unless an extension has been approved. On page 152, you'll see that the will serve letter for the Timber Creek Townhomes has been issued, and attached on page 153 are the beginning steps in managing our interconnection agreement with PG&E. And then on Monday, September 30th, Colleen Iana Campbell was born to Jill Campbell. So congratulations to Jill. And that concludes my management report.
Thank you, Michael. Any questions of Michael? If not, we'll move on to Rick and the operations report.
I'll try to finish by 11. Is that, you want to just get some stuff?
Committee reports.
Good morning. In the board's packet on pages 154 and 155, I show the current summer project list, and when staff and the operations department continue to button things up and get ready for winter. And I won't go into any detail on the report unless anybody's have any questions about that and that list of activities. Some projects, notable, some projects were moved to 2014. For example, the Loop Roads electrical project, as well as relocating some water meters on the west side. I'd also like to report to the board that we did receive a check from Tahoe Mountain Milers for the Kirkwood 10K, and this is in the board's packet on pages 155, 156, and 157. And we're pleased to receive the check for just over $1,000 for that event. We also received a $500 check from the Kirkwood Community Association for the chili cook-off, so that was a nice donation, and we appreciated that. And then finally, for my report today, I just wanted to say that we are in the process of doing chipping in Kirkwood Valley, and we've hired a local contractor, Bob Barber, to do the chipping service for us. He is currently working on the west side, and we hope to complete all the activities by the 18th. However, if there's things left out after the 18th, we may go back and take care of it, but that's our goal for now. But that really concludes my report unless there's any questions from the board.
That's great, and thank you to everybody. Look at all the whole projects that have been going on. It's a huge list.
It
So
is.
thank you to the whole staff for that. Thank you, Rick.
I'll let them know. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Brandy, electric and propane.
Hi.
Hi, Brandy.
So to start the electric propane update, I'd like to talk a little bit about the power outage that happened yesterday evening that I'm sure everyone is aware of. We've been working with Power Secure on the Volvo generators. We're still battling a fuel pressure issue there, though they have made some progress, which is exactly what happened last night.
What time is it?
It was about 5:45.
Oh, I got here at 6:30.
It was pretty short. It only lasted about 30 seconds to a minute. But it was an outage, and we would like to continue working on the project and get it solved by the time snowmaking comes around. So the changes that Power Secure has made so far include new pressure regulators, new booster pump, a new filter on the line, and they've cleaned the fuel meters. They did suggest yesterday that we may be battling a dirty fuel issue. Though we've had the tanks cleaned within the last year, they'd like us to check into the possibility that our fuel quality is not as good as it could be. So Michael asked me to contact Hunt and Sons to set up a call with them to discuss that next week, as well as a conference call with Power Secure on Monday to discuss what the plan is to solve this problem. So we are disappointed that we had the outage last night. Things had been running pretty well and our fuel efficiency was up as of last week. But we're still having to keep a close eye on it, and even with the operator knew about it, was watching the problem, and we still had an outage last night. So. But Power Secure has been very, very responsive, and it remains committed to getting us up and running on these. So. As far as the cats go, they continue to perform well. We do have an oil leak, a warranty issue on number 2 that Holta California is going to be repairing this month. They know that November 1st is our tentative start date for snowmaking. They're committed to making sure we're up and running by then. We can run it currently, it's just a minor leak. Any questions on the powerhouse before I move out into the valley?
Yeah, the ongoing unreliability of the Volvos, do you feel that it's pretty much narrowed to just being a fuel pressure issue at this point?
I do. Over the last year or so, we've seen these same sorts of under-frequency, under-voltage problems popping up, and Power Secure did make some strides in identifying the fuel meters clogging issue. So I think that most, if not all of them, can be pointed back to that fuel issue.
That would seem to me a relatively solvable problem. I mean, you have bigger pipes, you fill up the tanks more, you clean the fuel.
Agreed.
But part of the problem is they share a common.
That is true. And
So the failure mode is all or nothing. It's individual.
Right.
and we have discussed potentially piping individually or splitting the bus. Haven't come to a conclusion on that yet, because at this point, if it's a dirty fuel or a clogging issue, we've got to fix that first.
And the Volvos would be more sensitive to the fuel quality than the cats? That's the theory?
That's the theory. We have a different pre-filter setup on the cats,
Oh.
and the fuel pump itself is smaller on the Volvos, so restrictions make more of a difference.
So the problem with the cats is they're less efficient. The problem with the Volvos is this pressure thing.
Yes. Okay. Out in the valley, I think everybody's probably seen the Met Tower that we are very happy to report that is up and running over by the propane tanks. We also were happy to learn that we will be able to get online data from the Great Basin website, which is updated hourly. That's available to the public, to all of us, to dial into that site, see temperature, wind speed and direction, and precipitation in the form of inches of water. It won't tell us feet of snow, but it'll tell us inches of water. So we might actually get to see that, but there is a copy of what information is available on page 59 and 160 of the board packet. We had our first audit performed by Great Basin yesterday, where they came out.
But it always says 0, and it's not 0 out there.
So we get degrees C and meters
Celsius.
per second. But they do give us the ability to convert if we don't like the way they put it up there.
It's all zeros.
So when Great Basin was out yesterday, they had a couple of minor changes. They adjusted the wind direction, true north reading just a little bit, and the orientation of the temperature sensor. But no major problems. We don't expect any maintenance requirements. Great Basin will be coming out 4 times a year to make sure everything's up and running well. And lastly, for the MU site cleanup, like Michael mentioned, we're all the way off of that site. All of the equipment and debris has been removed so that the owners can continue doing whatever they need to do with that site. But we will continue to work on removing the old transformer that was sitting at the site that is no longer useful to us, getting it disposed of. Any questions?
I think, I just had the question about the Volvos, and you addressed that, so thank you. Thank you, Brandy.
Thank you.
Okay, August financials.
I'd like to introduce Kelly McBride, our senior accountant, and Jen Barstead, who is a new accountant for us, and they're going to run through the financials. Jen you've seen Kelly before, but I think this is Jen's first time.
Hi, Jen.
Hello.
And I hate to do this to you in your very first time in the desk, but we do need to move quickly.
Okay. Sounds good.
Right.
I'll cut out my life story. Okay, here we go. Jen's going to go for the balance sheet.
Okay.
The total operating cash is under budget by $249,000. And that is due to some non-budgeted expenditures and the fact that our AR is over budget. It doesn't look so on the balance sheet. But in fact, it is over $52,000 because property taxes have been misposted. Year-to-date, $140,000 worth. That has been corrected in September. And in the expenditures, we had $151,000 of capital expenditures that came out of operating that were not financed through RUS or other funds. And then we were over a little bit in operating expenses that we did pay for in our August. And then the total restricted cash is $569,000 over budget. This is the Union Bank COP reserve fund that was not budgeted for, and this will be corrected in September. We're going to move it out of that spot on the balance sheet. The total reserve cash is under budget by $207,000. This is the RUS interest payment. It should have been paid out of the trustee's special construction account, so that was misposted as well, and it's been corrected in September. And as I mentioned before, the AR is over budget. It's not the $88,000 under. Are there any questions?
I'm just curious, what's the source of the mispostings? Is it, correctable, or?
Yes, it's correctable. Yes, and it has been done in September.
But in future, there'll be fewer mispostings?
Yes, yes.
That's what you're here to ensure?
Yes.
And I think this time is really good for, and Jen even actually came, with Jill out, has helped our other staff kind of take a look at these, and they found many things on this balance sheet that they didn't understand or comprehend before, but they were able to find issues with the balance sheet. So, though, Jill's out, it's really helped our other staff grow and look at the balance sheet differently.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. And I will be going over income statements. Quickly starting with the combined income statement, you'll see that overall operating revenues are down from plan by $29,000. This is mainly due to commercial revenues being down overall. Overall operating expenses are over plan by $7,400, mainly due to some operations and maintenance, which we'll get into in the individual statements. Overall, total operating, we have a negative variance of $136,000 for the month, which is $36,000 under plan. Some notes. General and administration, you'll notice operations and maintenance is over, and that was due to the CSB lighting project being completed. We did not account for that, but that was the total of that. You'll notice in fire department that salaries and wages are up, and that is due to district staff spending time in August on fire department calls and issues. You'll notice that in wastewater, salaries and wages are also up as well, and that was due to miscoding of employee time for the membrane project, which will be corrected in September. We'll be moving those expenses to the membrane project as opposed to straight salaries and wages. Electric revenue is down $22,000, mainly due to commercial revenue being down for the month of August. You'll notice that contract services is over budget in electric, and this was due to net metering legal expenses, the consulting we got for the net metering issues. Overall, though, in electric, you'll notice that they're only $1,200 over budget for operating expenses for the year, so I think that was important to note that they are taking a good hard look at what they're doing and trying to keep a hold on that, as it is important to our RUS financing. Snow removal.
I'm sorry, can I ask one question about electric? So last year, the fact that the budget didn't quite match, I felt was kind of a learning experience. But this year, I'd expect it to match fairly well.
We're definitely keeping a closer tie on all of that.
So there's two questions for you. One is the KMD internal usage is up like 4,000. Is that going to continue for the whole year?
It just depends on how the usage comes from the plant, the wastewater treatment plant. That's the big part of the KMPUD internal use. I feel like in August we probably had a higher internal use because of all the work being done with the membrane replacement project and things like that.
Okay, and then the other thing that we had asked to be able to show in this fiscal year is the kilowatt hours sold versus budget.
On the
well, where it's appropriate to have the usage and usage budget and usage actual shown, because the dollar number is hard to figure out because you have the surcharges and the rest of that, and we can't budget for what we think the price of fuel will be. It's a constant, but we do. It's helpful to know, did we sell as many kilowatt hours as we thought? Because that may indicate problems downstream.
So we can look and see if PCS can actually give us that number on these CAM reports, or if that would be a separate report.
Okay, because it would be possible then to just show the usage data for each enterprise.
Just really quickly, Jill did talk to me about that before she went on maternity leave, so I know that is in the works.
Okay.
Thank you. On to snow removal, you'll notice there's a large increase in operations and maintenance, and that was due to the 924 transmission rebuild. A note on that, the expense for that was paid out of the snow removal reserve fund, so that did not come out of operating cash, but that is a large expense showing for that month due to that transmission rebuild. You'll notice that in propane, salaries and wages are up, and that was due to all of the work done for the leak project that went on in the valley. Another note on propane, you'll notice that we now have a line for the propane surcharge, so that you can see that separately. Previously, it was rolled up into the revenue line, but you wanted to see that separate, so we have broken that out now. And it is a negative because of the fact that propane was less expensive than what we actually have budgeted for that amount, so. Any questions?
No, I just noted on the electricity, at least for 2 months, it's only 2 months, but actually everything's pretty close for the 2 months combined,
Mhm.
right? Which is good.
One last thing, the operating cash waterfall for September is done. You'll notice that we are up 88,000 from budget, and I know that there was a question regarding why the actuals on the cash waterfall do not match the actuals in PCS, and that is because the cash waterfall is based on a cash flow through the actual balances in the bank, as opposed to the PCS balances being a period to post, and you have that disconnect sometimes between when the money actually hits the bank as opposed to when we have it posted in PCS.
You post it when the check's received?
Right, and
the bank posts it when they actually put it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Very good. Any
So
questions?
This is a cash balance, a bank balance.
Right, this is a cash flow of actual balances in the bank at that time.
It's a good answer, because I was going to ask the question.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you very much. And welcome.
That shows us having a low cash balance of $1.7 million in December, which is our low month, in addition to the reserve. So-
Right. No, it's a lot healthier than we were 12 months ago. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay, then we now move to committee reports, and because it's 11:15, I would like to suggest that, just ask if there's anything, any highlight that any committee chair would like to point out that hasn't been discussed yet
No, for
today.
communications, we covered everything already.
Any highlights that you want to?
No, it's been covered by all the staff.
Bob? Okay.
I'm going to go with nothing, too.
Okay. In that case, we're done with committee reports. General discussion, I know there's one item. We want to set a date for, I guess we're calling it a study session,
Rate strategy.
rate strategy session. And we could do it on a weekend of a board meeting, probably not on the same day, but what I was wondering, after I spoke with Michael briefly, is are people's calendars set well enough, you can predict, for sometime the week of December 23rd? Will people be here that week? Could we find a day there rather than taking a second day of a weekend for another lengthy meeting? I mean,
As long as the snow's good, I'll be here.
what if the snow's bad?
I'll be here anyway.
Okay, that's good.
I had it on November 8th. Was that
Well,
the date?
yeah, it's just that I'm going to be now in Finland, so I can't. Actually, November 7th, it was that Friday, yeah. But I've got to be traveling home that day from Finland.
Be here the week of the 23rd?
Bob?
Peter?
Hope so, yeah.
I'll be here.
So, Michael, I'm wondering if we could just set a time the week of the 23rd.
Okay. Do you want to set that now, or do you want to keep that open, or?
Well, why don't you and I just set a time? I'm just eager to get out on the tour, so why don't we just, you and I will talk and set a time and then confirm with everybody.
That's probably
Okay.
most practical.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so we are now going on the Out Valley tour, and after that we will adjourn the meeting.
One note is that Rena's done a really nice job.
I see-
Surprisingly, for some brunch food. You know, to take a plate with you. I'll be driving, Rick will be driving, so if we want to figure out which cars we're going to be.
Well, I guess Bob and I are both in separate cars going down and then continuing on from the bottom, right?
Great.
So we'll just need to know who to follow, where to follow.
Well, we'll be all following Michelle. She's the leader of the band, and she's in an RCI vehicle. and I'd recommend as many board members as possible to crowd in with her.
Yeah.
But then I'll be behind, and Rick will be in the expedition.